Hello and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Thursday, April 10th. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Ali Abunimah, Jon Elmer, Asa Winstanley, and Tamara Nassar. It's day 552 of the genocide in Gaza. Coming up, we'll speak with human rights activist and author Miko Peled about the context and history preceding the Trump administration's current crackdown on those critical of Israel. Ali will have a report on Israel's debunked October 7th mass rapes narrative that took yet another blow when Rami Davidian, a key witness, was exposed by Israeli media as a total fraud. Later on in the program, Jon will cover all the latest news from the resistance in Gaza and the Yemeni forces' battle in the Red Sea. But first, let's take a look at the news. Here's a brief summary of some of the latest developments this week in Palestine. Israel has committed massacres across all areas of the Gaza Strip, while for 6 weeks now it has closed all the crossings for food, fuel, medicines, construction vehicles, and every other essential supply, plunging Gaza into another deep starvation and health crisis. More than 390,000 people are estimated to have been displaced again, according to the United Nations, with no safe place to go. Every day, dozens are killed in Israeli attacks. The Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza said that in the last 3 weeks since Israel broke the ceasefire on March 18th, Israel has killed nearly 1,500 Palestinians. Al Jazeera reporter Anas al-Sharif shared this video of Israeli fire belt strikes hitting Gaza City on April 3rd. Our contributor Abu Bakr Abed has been reporting on the attacks over the last week on Deir Balah in central Gaza, where his cousin and his cousin's child were killed at the gates of the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital on Saturday. The Israeli army has issued forced expulsion orders to residents of Deir Balah in the past few days, threatening residents with attacks if they do not leave. The Israeli military said that it carried out 45 separate attacks across Gaza between Tuesday and Wednesday alone. On Wednesday, April 9th, Israel attacked the Shujaiya neighborhood of Gaza City, destroying dozens of residential buildings and killing dozens of Palestinians. An eyewitness told the Al Jazeera network that, quote, "We were talking in the street and suddenly we were shocked to see these buildings' bricks flying apart, in addition to flying hands and feet." Another survivor added, quote, "It is a massacre with the full meaning of the word. I haven't seen or heard about a massacre like this since the start of the war. Most of the martyrs are children and defenseless civilians." Mahmoud Basal, the spokesperson for Gaza's Civil Defense Corps, said that there were dozens of people missing and stuck underneath the rubble. Al Jazeera's reporter Hani Mahmoud said on Wednesday that, quote, "The army not only dropped multiple bombs, but these were also earthquake bombs that shook the very foundations of nearby buildings, destroying the majority of them. Entire residential buildings have been turned into ruins. A large number of casualties arrived at Al-Ahli Arab Hospital in Gaza City, but they are struggling because there is not sufficient medical care available due to shortages of supplies and doctors." Mahmoud said that civil defense crews needed to stop their rescue operations because armed Israeli quadcopter drones hovered above them. Also on Wednesday, Israeli airstrikes bombed the tents of displaced families in the so-called safe zone of Al-Mawasi, killing 3 Palestinians, including a child. The day before, on April 8th, Israel bombed Al-Mawasi. Doctors Without Borders said that its teams in the nearby clinic received 9 victims after a strike hit 300 meters away from the facility. 2 were dead on arrival, including a 2-year-old boy, and the 7 others were wounded. Excuse me. Dr. Mohammed Shath, an emergency room doctor working at the clinic, said, quote, "Honestly, I can't describe the scene and the injuries in the stomach, head, and chest. Absolute horror." On April 7th, Israel bombed a community kitchen also in Al-Mawasi that was distributing meals to displaced families. 4 children were killed in the airstrike. This video by journalist Samar Abu Samra shows a man carrying the body of a small girl who is wearing a traditional Palestinian thobe. He says, quote, "Look, they're all children, all of them." Another man says that the kitchen workers were distributing rice and lentils to children and Israel bombed them. And another witness says that the girl is 5 and the oldest of the children who were killed was 6. This is so wrong, he says. Nothing in the world justifies the killing of children.
طلع بيت كلهم أطفال كلهم أطفال لابسة الثوب الفلاحي الفلسطيني كلهم أطفال المستشهدين كلهم كم شهيد فيه حتى الآن يمكن 4 كلهم أطفال شو كان بيعمل؟ والله كانوا بيوزعوا رز قاعدين رز والله رز كانوا بيوزعوا عدس والله رز وعدس بيوزعوا على الأطفال بيضربوهم أخوي راح أنا 5 سنين 6 سنين أكبر بنت فيها حرام والله الله ما بقولها يا زلمة طنيات يموتوا ايش يعني؟ راح يجيبوا واكل ياكلوا ايش يا عمي؟ خلصونا شو هذا؟ ايش واكل؟ هاتوا لهم واكل ما تروح عندك اياه ما طنيات ولا شو يا عمي.
In the south, the Gaza government media office said on April 7th that Rafah is, quote, "the city that the Israeli occupation wiped off the map and turned into a complete humanitarian disaster." The media office stated that Israel has transformed the entire Rafah governorate, quote, "into a closed military operations zone, completely isolating it from the rest of the Gaza Strip and considering it a complete red zone. It continues to commit horrific massacres against defenseless civilians, causing the systematic and comprehensive destruction of infrastructure, vital facilities, and residential homes, rendering the city uninhabitable." The occupation army, the media office added, quote, "has completely destroyed more than 90% of the homes in Rafah governorate, representing more than 20,000 buildings containing more than 50,000 housing units. In addition, 22 of the 24 water wells were destroyed, including the main Canada well and the distribution pumps, depriving tens of thousands of families of safe drinking water. The isolated Rafah governorate was not only bombed, but was systematically destroyed and obliterated in a scene that reflects the occupation's premeditated intent to empty the land of its people and alter its geographic and demographic features, the office stated. Quote, "We affirm that these crimes will not pass without accountability and that the steadfastness of the people of Rafah Governorate and the rest of our people will remain a living witness that the will to live is stronger than the machine of death." The Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza reported this week that while medical teams and ambulance crews continue to operate under life-threatening conditions to save lives, 37% of medications and 59% of all medical supplies are at zero stock. This includes medications for operating rooms, intensive care units, and emergency departments that have been depleted to unprecedented levels, with higher percentages of critical medications being at zero stock, such as 54% of medications for cancer treatment, 40% of those for primary care, and 51% of medicines for maternal and child health. Furthermore, the destruction of diagnostic imaging equipment has severely restricted patients' access to these vital services, while fuel shortages threaten to shut down hospitals' essential departments that rely on generators, the health ministry added. The UN Children's Fund UNICEF warned this week that Israel's ongoing blockade of humanitarian aid is having terrible consequences for 1 million children in the Gaza Strip. And without essential food, medicine, shelter, and safe water, malnutrition, diseases, and other preventable conditions will likely surge, leading to an increase in preventable child deaths. UNICEF said that complementary food for infants, which are crucial for growth when food stocks are low, has run out in central and southern Gaza. Israel murdered 3 journalists this week in Gaza. On April 5th, an Israeli airstrike bombed the home of journalist Islam Mekdad in Khan Yunis, killing her and her son Adam, along with 5 other members of her family. On April 7th, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 who worked for the Palestine Today news agency, was killed when an Israeli airstrike targeted a media tent outside of the Nasser Hospital complex in Khan Yunis. Another man, Yusuf al-Khandizar, was also killed. Helmi's colleague, reporter Ahmed Mansour, was engulfed in flames as colleagues desperately attempted to save him. Mansour was left in critical condition with life-threatening injuries and succumbed to his wounds on Tuesday. A witness to the airstrike told Middle East Eye that those in the tent, quote, tried desperately to rescue Ahmed Mansour from the flames, but there were no resources available, as the foam, wood, and nylon in the tent quickly caught fire. The Gaza government media office said that 8 other journalists were injured in the attack. The media office adds that 211 reporters have now been killed in Gaza since October 2023. Euromed Human Rights Monitor condemned the public escalation of the slaughter of journalists. The organization's legal department director, Lima Bustani, stated that, quote, burning a journalist alive in Gaza is not aimed at silencing the truth. Israel already relies on a far greater force, the world's indifference to the truth. Bustami explained that Israel's systematic targeting of Palestinian journalists also sends a chilling message. Your truth means nothing. We can kill you with the camera in your hand, and no one will save you. She added that Israel's crimes against Palestinian journalists is, quote, a performance of power and a declaration of impunity in action. We've published many features on the Electronic Intifada in the last week, but we wanted to highlight excerpts of Starvation and Solitary Confinement, 14 Months in Israeli Prison, by Abdullah Yunus, writing from Gaza. Abdullah profiles the journalist Ahmed Shakura, a friend of his who was arrested in December 2023 and detained inside Israeli prisons for more than a year. He said he lost around 138 pounds during his detention. Quote, I have known Shakura, who is 37 years old, for 4 years. Our friendship developed while he was a trainer for a course I took on digital media in Gaza City in 2021. He works for the Palestine Today news agency and is married with 5 children. He's also a skilled cook and enjoys swimming and playing electronic strategy games. I met up with Shakura in the Al-Rimal neighborhood in March. It was noon, and we sat outside under the sunshine that he had missed seeing during his 14-month detention. He was one of 369 Palestinian prisoners released by Israel in a February exchange for 3 Israeli prisoners. We found no place to sit and talk except on the rubble of the destroyed houses around us. Shakura told me he had been listening to the news of the Israeli military invasion of Gaza City on the radio in his home when soldiers arrived and demanded via loudspeaker that the residents leave their homes and surrender. Shakura said the men were told to strip down to their underwear. The soldiers tied me with 3 strong plastic handcuffs and blindfolded me so that I could not see anything, he said, pointing to the wounds still visible on his hands. These handcuffs caused severe harm to my hands. They crushed my skin and flesh and reached the bone. The Israeli soldiers took Shakura and a group of his male neighbors by bus northward to the Israeli military base in 𝐓𝐡𝐞. For 18 hours straight, we were not allowed to drink water or relieve ourselves, and despite being very cold, we were not allowed to wear any clothes, he recalled. The Israeli army then transferred Shakura to the notorious Sdei Teiman military camp. I was still blindfolded and handcuffed, and they made me sit on gravel with rough edges. It caused me injuries in my leg. I remained like that for 5 days in a row. Shakura was then transferred to the Al-Jalameh prison in central Israel for 140 days, which he described as the most brutal period of his imprisonment. For 5 continuous hours on the road to Al-Jalameh, the soldiers beat me severely with iron rods. I did not know that there were other detainees with me until I heard their screams while they were being beaten, like me, Shakura said, mentioning that he was blindfolded the whole time. When he was released on February 15th, he said he did not know whether his wife and children were still alive. When the bus arrived in Gaza, I saw my wife and children waiting for me. When they saw me, they didn't recognize me at first because I had lost so much weight that I no longer looked like they remembered. He said, my children looked at me, unsure if I was their father or not. But their doubts faded when I smiled at them and rushed to embrace them. At that time, I felt great joy and thanked God a lot. Shakura is now receiving medical and psychological care at an outpatient government program at Nasser Medical Complex in Khan Yunis. He has returned to work as a journalist and also hopes to open a restaurant in Gaza one day. Those are excerpts from Starvation and Solitary Confinement, 14 Months in Israeli Prison by Abdullah Yunus, writing from Gaza on electronicintifada.net. Turning to the occupied West Bank, my colleague Tamara Nassar writes that Israel is subjecting Palestinian children in the West Bank to a campaign of systematic ethnic cleansing, according to the human rights group Defense for Children International Palestine. Since the beginning of the year, Israel has killed 20 children in the West Bank. In the latest case on Sunday, April 6th, Israeli soldiers shot 3 Palestinian children, including 2 with American citizenship, in the town of Tormusaya. One of the 3 died as a result. The town's mayor said the 3 boys were picking green almonds from a field near Route 60, a highway used by Israeli settlers that crosses the West Bank. Palestinian-American Amr Rabi, 14 years old, was killed by Israeli fire. Israeli soldiers shot his 15-year-old friend Ayub Jabbar, also an American citizen, and he was placed in intensive care following the attack. Their friend Abdul Rahman Shahada, 15, was hospitalized as well. The Israeli army called the 3 children terrorists in a post on X that shows a few seconds of grainy footage that allegedly captures the moment they were shot. The Israeli army did not even try to claim that the boys had thrown anything other than rocks. Amr's video said, however, that the video is not accurate and contains no evidence that his son had even thrown rocks. There were 6 bullets in his body, 2 in his heart, 2 in his shoulder, and 2 in his face, Amr's father told a reporter with the French news agency AFP. Also this month, the Israeli army shot and killed 16-year-old Omar Amr Zayud near the city of Jenin in the northern West Bank. An Israeli soldier in a heavily armored military vehicle shot Omar from a distance of about 80 meters on April 2nd, according to Defense for Children International Palestine. He was near a school by the entrance of the Palestinian town of Silat al-Harithiyah, northwest of Jenin. Omar was allegedly throwing stones and explosive devices alongside other youth at 2 military vehicles. Israeli soldiers continue targeting children with deadly force, with no accountability, because world leaders allow them to act without consequence, said Ayed Abu Aktesh, Accountability Program Director at DCIP. For much more, read Tamara's report, Israel Kills Children Routinely in West Bank, on electronicintifada.net. Along with destroying children's rights to live, Israeli soldiers are trying to destroy their rights to learn as well. On April 8th, Israeli officials, accompanied by police, raided 6 separate UN-run schools in occupied Jerusalem and announced plans to close them within 30 days. Philippe Lazzarini, the head of UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees, said that, quote, some 800 boys and girls are directly impacted by these closure orders and are likely to miss finishing their school year. UNRWA schools are protected by the privileges and immunities of the United Nations. Today's unauthorized entries and issuance of closure orders are a violation of these protections and represent a revocation of Israel's obligations under international law, he said. These illegal closure orders come in the wake of Israeli Knesset legislation seeking to curtail UNRWA operations, Lazzarini stated. Al Jazeera correspondent Noor Oda said that the closure of the UNRWA schools is, quote, extremely problematic because the children would likely end up at Israeli institutions run by the Jerusalem municipality. She explained that the children admitted to Israeli schools would no longer be taught under the Palestinian curriculum, but rather under an Israeli curriculum that erases Palestinian identity and history. Meanwhile, Israeli forces are expanding their military attacks across the occupied West Bank and continue to destroy homes inside the Jenin refugee camp. The army also conducted heavy raids on Nablus and the Balata refugee camp on Wednesday. The Wafa news agency reported that Israeli occupation forces invaded the camp in the pre-dawn hours of Wednesday, deploying troops extensively inside and sealing off the camp's entrances. The soldiers ordered families to leave their homes at gunpoint and then ransacked them. Palestine Red Crescent paramedics said that during the invasion of Balata, 6 Palestinians were shot and injured by Israeli soldiers, 4 with live ammunition and 2 with rubber-coated steel bullets. A child was hit in the face by a tear gas canister, and dozens more suffered from tear gas inhalation. And early this morning, April 10th, 23-year-old Ahmed Manasra was released from Israeli prisons after spending 10 years inside and enduring what the Palestinian Prisoners Club says was physical and psychological torture, including solitary confinement, since his arrest in 2016. The Jerusalem Prisoner Committees said that the Israeli army released Manasra far from the Nafha prison in the Nakab, where he was imprisoned, while his family awaited his release at the prison gate. A Bedouin resident in the Beersheba area recognized the 23-year-old, contacted his family, and informed them of their son's release. Our colleague Omar Karmi wrote in 2022 that Manasra's case came to wider public attention in 2015 when a leaked video of his interrogation was broadcast by Palestinian media. The footage shows an Israeli interrogator hurling abuse at the boy and accusing him repeatedly of attempted murder, despite the boy's insistence that he did not have any memory of any stabbings. Manasra was just 13 when he and a cousin, Hassan, 15, allegedly went to the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 settlement in occupied East Jerusalem with the intention, his lawyer, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞 said, to scare Jews so they'd stop killing Palestinians. According to the indictment, Hassan stabbed a security guard who was lightly injured. They then chased an Israeli boy, 13, whom Hassan had also stabbed and critically injured. When they tried to escape, Hassan was shot and killed by Israeli police, which operate in occupied East Jerusalem. Manasra, meanwhile, was hit by a car as he ran away. Disturbing footage uploaded later saw the seriously hurt Manasra surrounded by Israelis shouting curses at the boy as he lay on the ground. The indictment against him did not at any point suggest that Manasra had himself stabbed anyone, and the boy denied any intention to murder, to which prosecutors had wanted him to confess. That's from Omar Karmi's 2022 report. Ahmed Manasra case highlights Israel's cruelty to Palestinian children. Manasra spent the last 10 years in Israeli prisons and held in solitary confinement for the past 5 months, which has worsened his mental health condition, according to the family's lawyer. Finally, as we always do, we wanted to highlight people expressing joy, determination, and resilience across Palestine. Afif Nasuli, a journalist and volunteer with the medical solidarity organization 𝐓𝐿IA, posted this clip of himself on the beach near Khan Yunis this week. He writes, quote, "I know you're seeing terrible things coming out of Gaza right now, and I'm glad advocates are sharing the images and the realities in the north. The loudness of strikes and drones is torturous. The images are hard to watch because they are truly happening to human beings that are just down the way. But Gaza is so much more than Israel's demolition derby, and Palestinians are so much more than their suffering in this moment. My heart is having a hard time adding to the barrage of images that convey the reality of genocide, because I don't want to make my time here about sharing images you already have. I went to the beach for a walk after doing some work in Khan Yunis the other day, and I wanted to share with you the ultimate resistance. Palestinian kids having a little bit of fun, even amidst strikes and drones and death. They are the future of this nation, and their health and happiness is the purest form of resisting this mass murder." Afif adds that a colleague of his told him something that so many in Gaza express about the beach. The beach is the one place that the war can't change or steal from us. Here's Afif on the beach.
Oh, it's funny. Did he start it or did you? They're all doing it. That's so cute. Adi, how's it going?
Good. Look at all these
You have an audience? عايشهم كيفين انتم؟ ايوه ايوه.
That's Afif Nasuli in Khan Yunis. And that's it for the news roundup. As always, go to electronicintifada.net for much more, especially to read our new features by our brave writers in Gaza. You're watching the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleague Ali Abunimah. Hi, Ali.
Hi, Nora. Thank you for that. And thank you for giving us something to smile about at the end there. So much heavy news. It's shocking to me that Ahmed Manasra was in prison for 10 years. It seems like yesterday, but it probably seems like 50 years to him, given his mistreatment. Yeah.
I mean, he you know, the video footage that, you know, we all saw when he was just a boy being interrogated and psychologically tortured by Israeli police, you know, being forced to confess to something that he never did. You know, I mean, this is routine for Palestinian children in Israeli detention and you know, I mean, Israeli police and soldiers offer secret evidence that only the court can see. The children are not granted you know, any access to lawyers or to translations because everything is in Hebrew, a language that most of them don't speak. And then he was thrown into solitary confinement, which is a method of torture under every single international law, whatever value international law has when it comes to Israel. And he, you know, just today, how he was dropped off, you know, his family then was tortured. And he was one last time where, you know, his family was waiting for him at the gates of this prison in the Nakab, and which is far from Jerusalem. So his family had to travel to this, you know, this prison, and the prison authorities dropped him off in some field far away, and you know, made him wander around on his own until a Bedouin family saw him and brought him to his family. I mean, it's just, it's endless.
It is cruelty at every point. And thank you for keeping track of it. Well, we, as you said at the top of the show, we have so much to talk about today, including the Trump-Netanyahu meeting that happened in Washington. But before that, why don't we get to our guest? So I just want to remind everyone that you are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Ali Abunimah, here with my colleague, Nora Barrows-Friedman. On Tuesday this week, an immigration judge in Louisiana gave the U.S. government an additional 24 hours to produce evidence that it had grounds to deport Mahmoud Khalil. He is the Columbia University student leader arrested a month ago at the start of the Trump administration's crackdown on free speech in support of Palestinian rights. The government claims it has the right to cancel Khalil's lawful permanent residency by the unilateral and personal decree of Secretary of State Marco Rubio on the grounds that Khalil's role in student protests against Israel's genocide in Gaza harms the foreign policy of the United States. Immigration Judge Jamie Comans said she will rule on Friday, that's tomorrow, whether Khalil can be deported or whether he must be freed. If the government's evidence doesn't support Khalil's deportation, Comans said, she will terminate the case against him. If he's not removable, I don't want him to continue to be detained. NPR reported Comans saying during an hour-long hearing at the detention center where Khalil has been held since March 9th, the day after he was seized from his home in New York City. I will have him released, Coleman said. Immigration attorney Cyrus Mehta commented on Twitter that, quote, the immigration judge should have terminated the case on the spot if the government did not have evidence to meet its heavy burden. A Louisiana television station reported that federal officials submitted evidence to the judge with, quote, just minutes to spare before the close of business on Wednesday. WWL Louisiana has confirmed through sources that the Department of Homeland Security has begun providing documentation that it claims supports the removal of Khalil from the United States under a rarely used section of immigration law, according to the TV station. Mark van der Hout, one of Khalil's attorneys who attended the hearing, said, quote, the government has not produced a single shred of evidence to date to support any of its allegations or charges in this case, including its outrageous position that Mahmoud's mere presence and activities in this country have potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences. Khalil's lawyers say that this is an unconstitutional pretext to violate the First Amendment. They are separately continuing a challenge to his detention in federal court in New Jersey. Of course, the judge's decision expected tomorrow is crucial for Khalil and his wife Noor, who is expected to give birth to the couple's first child any day now. But this is an important precedent-setting case with grave consequences for the constitutional rights of millions of people. As the Trump administration expands its crackdown to colleges and universities across the United States, chilling free speech and causing fear to countless people, we wanted to remind ourselves that though unprecedented in many ways, US government repression of free speech about Palestine and of Palestinians has a long history. There was the notorious Los Angeles 8 or LA 8 case, which started in 1987 when the US government began a 20-year effort to deport two Palestinians, Khadr Hamida and Michel Shhade, and 6 other students for their political activities, including alleged support for the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. That led to a 2-decade legal battle, and in 2007, the government finally dropped the case. It's notable that Mark van der Hout, one of Mahmoud Khalil's attorneys, also represented the LA 8 starting in January 1987. The long but ultimately successful struggle to support the LA 8 unfolded in the context of the First Intifada, the Palestinian uprising that began later the same year those students were arrested. Then, in the context of the Second Intifada of the early 2000s, and particularly after the 9/11 attacks, the US government launched another major crackdown on Palestinian Americans. And that's one of the topics we're going to talk about with our guest today, Miko Peled. He is well known as the author of The General's Son, an autobiographical account of his family, including his father, Mati Peled, who was a general in the Israeli army during the 1967 war and later met Yasser Arafat and urged negotiations with the Palestine Liberation Organization. Miko Peled's most recent book is Injustice, the story of the Holy Land Foundation 5. Miko, welcome to the Electronic Intifada live stream.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to see you.
Thank you.
Miko.
We're really pleased you could join us. And you're at Dar al-Hurriya in Washington, Palestine Freedom House. We're going to talk about that a bit later, but I just want to commend you on the beautiful background you have. It's really impressive.
Thank you.
So, Miko, the men convicted in the Holy Land 5 case are Ghassan al-Ashi, Shukri Abu Bakr, Mufid Abdul Qadir, Abdul Rahman Ode, and Muhammad al-Mazayan. They were convicted in 2008 and sentenced to prison terms ranging from 15 to 65 years. Sketch out for us who these men are and what the US government accused them of doing.
Sure. It's again, it's a pleasure to be with you guys. So it was December of 2001, so very shortly after the attacks of 9/11, the administration had to announce. There was an order from the president saying we need to announce something. We need to close somebody down. We need to seize assets. We need to show that we're doing something. And it was basically, we need to round up the usual suspects. That's literally the atmosphere that was created there. And the usual suspects at the top of the list was the Holy Land Foundation. They were an organization led by Muslim Palestinians. They were supporting Palestinians. About a decade before that, the FBI had already started bugging their phones. The various Zionist groups and Zionist politicians had already been trying to get the IRS to remove their nonprofit status. So this was already in the works. And then 9/11 came, so their name popped up right away. So they were closed down. They were designated a terrorist organization or supporting terrorism, organization supporting terrorism, and their assets were seized. And they had millions of dollars in the bank because this was right after Ramadan. And talk about burden of proof. I mean, to designate a person or an organization as a supporter of terrorism, there is no burden of proof. You've got the Treasury Department and you've got the State Department, and between them, somebody needs to say, yes, this organization is such and such, and that's really the end of the story. So there is no burden of proof. And I think it's important to note as well that in the mid-1990s, when the U.S., when the Clinton administration had already placed Hamas and other organizations under this designation of terrorist organizations, the Holy Land Foundation leaders like Ghassan El-Ashi that you mentioned and Shukri Abu Bakr, they came to Washington to discuss with the authorities to say, that we want to make sure we're doing everything right, that we're not violating any laws. And basically they were told that there's no reason for concern. But there was also no guarantees that what they're doing was okay. So they were kind of left in limbo. But then anyway, it was December of 2001. They were shut down. And in their innocence, they believed that this was as a result of hysteria, which was understandable. 9/11 attacks, everybody was scared. Muslims were under suspicion. So they sued the government here in Washington, D.C. And the expectation was that because they had all their paperwork, every penny was accounted for, that they would prevail. And they didn't. The evidence that they brought was struck from the record. The evidence that the government brought, which was based on false information that was sent by the Israeli authorities, was accepted. And suddenly there was, and then indictments came down for a criminal trial. And the lawyers couldn't understand what the hell was going on. There was no crime. There was no, why are they being indicted and what are they being indicted for? And then the process began, like you said earlier, of a very long trial, a trial that was then, there was a hung jury, so there was no results. And then a second trial in which they were all finally convicted and given these really monstrous prison sentences. And so that's really what it was now. Ghassan El-Ashi and Shukri Abu Bakr were actually the heads of the organization, Shukri being the executive director and really the engine that ran the organization. And they ended up receiving each 65-year prison sentences, which are, completely insane. And Mufid Abdul Qadir was found not guilty on all charges in the first trial. And as the jury was being polled by the prosecution, one of the jurors said she changed her mind. And as the defense lawyers were objecting and so forth, the judge called a mistrial on him as well. He later on got 20 years in prison, and he was just released now to a halfway home, and then he should be released home and be free very soon. The other two, Mohammed al-Mazain and Abdurrahman Odeh, they've already been released. Mohammed al-Mazain, his naturalization process was interrupted by the trial. So he was released, not to his family, But at the last minute, as his family went to meet him and pick him up from the prison, he was sent to an ICE facility. He spent a year there and then deported to Turkey. He's an older gentleman, you know, his entire family he is here. He has children, grandchildren, but of course nobody cares. And Abdurrahman Odeh tried to live here after he was released, but being a convicted of terrorism and a felon, he couldn't get a job, couldn't open a bank account, couldn't start a business, couldn't travel. He was under the watchful eye of the authorities, and ended up having to leave the country as well. I think, and that's kind of the summary of the story.
And I'll just add that this was one of the most egregious cases, but there was a wave of such prosecutions against Palestinians and Palestinian Americans like Muhammad Salah and Dr. Abdul Halim Ashkar, which Sami al-Arian as well, that where the trials were not slam dunks for the government at all. Just like in the Holy Land 5 case, they either had to try them several times in order to get a conviction, or they were acquitted on all the serious terrorism charges and were convicted of, relatively minor things. And of course, none of these people had anything to do with 9/11. What were they actually accused of? What was the conviction for?
So initially in the first trial, there were 32 charges. And what happens is, and this is very relevant actually to what's happening now, because they're trying to pass legislation that would revoke the nonprofit status of organizations that deal with Palestine. And so what happens is, once that is revoked, now you're being charged on all kinds of issues like lying to the IRS, because initially when you applied for a nonprofit, you had to make some statements as to the purpose of your organization. Well, once it's revoked, that means you lied on that, and that means you lied on all your taxes. So you've got a whole list of accusations that have nothing to do with terrorism, but have to do with the fact that you supposedly or allegedly you lied on all this paperwork. So that had a lot to do with the fact that there were so many, that the indictment had so many charges. And basically it was material support, but they couldn't show that they were sending money to Hamas, which is what they wanted to do, because they weren't. In fact, they weren't sending money. Most of what they did was in kind. So they gave actually money, they gave very little. But what they tried to show, and succeeded unfortunately, is that the Zakat organization, or the charity organizations with which they worked in Palestine on the ground, organizations that were vetted by the State Department, organizations that other large, the USAID and other orgs worked with on the ground in Palestine because they were effective, that they were controlled by Hamas. So even though all of the evidence demonstrated that that was not true, even though the witnesses that the prosecution brought, they brought two witnesses that were Israeli intelligence officers, whose identities we don't know, because they were allowed to testify without revealing who they really were. Even with that, it was very, very clear it was impossible to connect the Zakat committees with Hamas. And I read probably 20,000 pages of court transcripts as I was working on the book, and it's incredibly telling when you read the minute by minute, statement by statement that is taking place during the exam, the cross examination and so on. These witnesses had nothing to say. They had no information whatsoever, and certainly no evidence that these organizations, the Zakat organizations, had anything to do with Hamas. And yet the prosecution prevailed somehow. That was the reality. And then one of the lawyers said the only place in the world where the Zakat committees are considered to have worked with Hamas or be controlled by Hamas was in the courtroom in the Northern District of Texas, where the trial took place, because everybody else worked with them and there was never a problem. So this is what this is. It was really the worst kind of a kangaroo court, and the judge was not going to allow the defense to win, especially the second judge. There was no way the trial was going to end without a conviction. I think Ralph Nader characterized it as he said the second judge was a hanging judge.
Mm.
It's it's just unbelievable to think that this happened, and the government now is learning that they had set a precedent with this, and now they're going after other much less visible activists, students, people who are very young and don't have even much legal defense, just scooping people up. And it's just kind of
actually what I learned as I was working on the book was the precedent was set much earlier.
Yeah,
when the government was going after the Black Panthers, and they were going after the African American community and leaders, and so that's really when the precedent was set for what we saw with Hoyland and these other people that you mentioned, and what is happening now.
Yeah. Well, bring us, to the present moment. Talk about that. Talk about the different precedents that were set, and what the climate was at the time in terms of the fears that people had in the community and the ability to organize in defense of the Holy Land Five and in defense of, activism for Palestinians in general. What lessons should we be applying in the current context as this crisis, evolves?
I think this goes back to the fact that the different Zionist organizations and individuals that operate in the United States are terrified. They've always been terrified because their case is built on very weak foundations. So every little thing is a threat. Everything is considered a threat. A student activist is a threat. A relief organization is a threat. So they have to go after everything. And they very wisely created or helped to pass or push to pass a body of legislation that prevents, these things from coming up. So, there was this ridiculous new definition of anti-Semitism, the IHRA definition of that was, it was a brilliant strategy. I mean, now everybody's afraid because nobody knows what is and what isn't anti-Semitism. It's a very vague definition. So people are confused and they'd rather not say anything. The Holy Land Foundation, they were not dealing with politics, they were dealing with relief, but they painted a picture of, number one, a very strong and reliable organization that did a lot of good, but also of a reality in Palestine that nobody could explain. So they were a threat. So the Zionists came out against them, like I said, almost a decade. And this came out in the trial, by the way, that as early as 1993, Shukri Abu Bakr's phones were tapped by the FBI. And again, this is a result of so-called information that was provided to the FBI by Zionist organizations, the ADL and others. And so everything is a threat to them. So they're coming up. So they're coming after everyone. And that's the reality we exist in. And, they preempt. So they're always a decade ahead of us. Suddenly we realize that you can't say this and you can't say that. And, this reality on campuses where students are being rounded up like this is insane. But it all goes back to that. It all goes back to the fact that the Zionists are terrified that that people will realize that Zionism is a racist ideology, that it produced a violent genocidal apartheid regime in Palestine, that everything that they've worked so hard to legitimize over the last 100 years has no legitimacy. And the only way for them to do that is by creating this reign of terror, if you will, and by legislating and arresting. And the Holy Land Foundation 5, I travel around the country and talk to a lot of young people, and everybody, that's part of a Muslim or Arab community remembers volunteering, remembers the fundraisers, remember participating. The Holy Land Foundation was it was a pillar in the community here in the United States. And the guys that, especially Shukri, Abu Bakr, and Hassan Elashi, they were well known and loved everywhere and well respected. So taking them down the way they did, taking them out of the picture and giving them these really horrifying prison sentences was a lesson, was something that, and it worked for a very long time. You couldn't hold a fundraiser in a mosque. Muslim communities, Arab communities didn't want to have anything to do with Palestine. I mean, couldn't do a fundraiser for Palestine. And it, so it worked. But this is really what this is all about. This is all part of the exact same strategy to make sure that no criticism, or not even the slightest hint of criticism, or something that might lead to criticism. And we all know the story of the USS Liberty, a U.S. naval vessel in international water that was brutally assaulted by the Israeli military, and nothing happened of it. There were no consequences. They were silenced. The whole story was silenced, and of course there were no consequences that had to be paid by Israel. So this is something that goes on for decades, and it is getting worse. I think what we're seeing on campuses now, the rounding up of students, is perhaps the worst iteration of this reality.
I want to follow up a bit on Nora's question, and that I remember the period immediately after 9/11, the several years after 9/11, when there was a great deal of fear. I mean, that the Holy Land 5 trial was in, as you mentioned, northern Texas. We also had trials in Chicago.
Right.
The Muhammad Salah and Dr. Abdul Halim Ashkar, as I remembered, who were acquitted by a jury on all the terrorism-related charges that the government spent millions of dollars bringing against them, but each was convicted on relatively minor contempt charges. But somehow the judge, you called the judge in the Holy Land 5 case a hanging judge, was able to put them, to put them in prison for these relatively minor things. But I want to talk about, at that time, I remember there was a lot of fear in the community, and people didn't want to come out and organize, and didn't even want to support, or they were afraid to come out and speak in defense of people who, even with these serious accusations, are considered before the law innocent until proven guilty. And in this case, the guilty verdict was a grave injustice, as you wrote. But I guess this is a question for all of us. I don't know if you have the answer by yourself, Miko. How do we avoid falling into that trap of fear again, even though things are objectively fearful for many people? What does solidarity look like when a few people are being attacked and made examples of in order to scare the many?
I think that's a question that is relevant not only to what we're seeing here, not only what we're seeing in Palestine. I visited a couple of years ago. I visited parts of Hungary that are now in Ukraine, and parts of Romania, parts of Hungary that are now, kind of looking at the roots of some of the ultra-Orthodox, the anti-Zionist ultra-Orthodox communities that exist here in the United States. I'm working on a book about them. And you walk around some of these cities, like a city that was Satmar, now it's called Satumare. It was a city that was at least 1/3 Jewish. And one day the Nazis came and took 1/3 of the population and put them in a ghetto. 1/3 of the population is a lot of people. That means, the butcher, the baker, a teacher, a professor, a doctor, and people that you knew every day. And one day they were gone. And the question is always, well, where was everybody else? I mean, how come people didn't stand up, didn't come in to stop this, And it's the same thing. I mean, why, I remember the biggest shock I had with the Holy Land Foundation when I was when I was beginning to learn about the case was just how ridiculous it was and how easy it should have been to win for the defense. And yet it wasn't. And how come the communities are not, everybody's all up in arms and protesting and supporting them in large numbers? You know, this is a question that I always ask myself, why are people letting this happen? Why are we not all standing up and demanding justice when these things happen? And I don't know what the answer is. I think that we're, for some reason, and even on the issue of Palestine, which we should learn to expect this by now, you know, we're still shocked when things happen. We're still amazed. We're still shocked. Oh my God, how could this happen? Whereas now we'd know to expect this, and then rather than be shocked, figure out how we preempt the next one, because we know the next one's going to come. If we look at Gaza now, there was a short so-called ceasefire, which really benefited Israel more than it benefited the Palestinians. But, you know, there are images coming out of Gaza of people getting some food, getting some water, building a little thing here and there, a little bit of optimism. We knew full well that the attack was going to come back. We knew full well that the Israelis were ready to come in and bomb again. It was perfectly predictable. And yet when it happened, everybody was in shock. Everybody was appalled, as of course we should be, because it is shocking. But at the same time, we knew this was going to happen. How do we preempt the next one? And I think that's really the only thing we can do. We need to sit together and say, well, what are they going to do next? You know, here's what they've done over the last few decades. Here's how they operate. How do we preempt the next thing that's going to happen? And what could it possibly be? And perhaps that is something that is required. That is something that we all need to sit down and think about, is how do we preempt the next one? How do we prevent the next attack on Gaza? Because we know there's going to be one. You know, October 7, what happened on October 8th, and since then, it was predictable, and which means it was preventable. And again, we're always shocked and thinking, well, how do we, what could we have done? Well, I don't know, but I think if we sit down and think about it, then maybe we can preempt and figure out how to deal with whatever comes next, because there will be something next. It's not going to stop. So I don't know if that's a good answer, but I think that's the only answer that seems to come up right now.
I think it's important to recognize that none of this is new and that people have suffered because of it, but people have also survived these kinds of crackdowns and crises, and communities have learned from them. And so I hope that's what we take away from this. I just want to point out some news that appeared in the New York Times today, in an article that talks about there's the headline, how Hamas and the US tried to strike a hostage deal. And it's sort of a post-mortem on the direct, unprecedented, as far as we know, direct US-Hamas talks that occurred last month. And according to the New York Times, as part of the agreement that the US and Hamas were talking about, which would have released an Israeli soldier with dual US-Israeli citizenship, that Hamas was asking for 2 of the Holy Land 5 to be released in part of that exchange with the United States. Of course, we know that deal never happened because Israel sabotaged it and instead, as you just said, resumed the full-scale bombing and genocide. But that just underscores that they are seen by Palestinians across the board as political prisoners.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Yeah. So, well, in the last few minutes we have with you, Miko, let's shift a bit. As is well known, you grew up as the son of Israeli General Miko Peled. You have for many years been an anti-Zionist activist and a strong proponent of a one-state solution. You must still continue to look at what's happening in Israel through the many lenses you can bring to that situation. And so we want to try and get your insight about what you are observing in and about Israeli society now, how long do you think Israel can carry on its genocide? I mean, we've had guests before saying that, there is social breakdown in Israel, there is brain drain, capital flight. What are you seeing?
I think Israeli society is really a combination of different groups that have nothing to do with each other, that have been kind of tied together with Scotch tape. That's really what Israeli society is. It's never been a society as such. It's been a different groups, and really Scotch tape is what held them together. And there's no question that the events of October 7th, the Scotch tape was ripped off. It was completely ripped off. And what we're seeing today is all of these different groups at each other's throats. Now, they've always been at each other's throats to some degree, but right now, the way they go at each other is unprecedented. I mean, the vitriol, the racism, the hatred towards one another, towards each other, is unprecedented. And in the past, within the Israeli political spectrum, there were differences, but on the certain issues, there was unity. On the issue of the land, the issue of the state, the issue of genocide, there was complete there's a real sense of unity. They set aside their differences. Today, while there's very little dissent when it comes to the genocide and the slaughter of Palestinians, the way the fact that the Palestinians are still holding some Israeli hostages is just driven the society completely insane. I mean, everybody is at everybody else's throats. The judicial system, the entire judicial apparatus is collapsing. The police, the law enforcement is collapsing. Healthcare and education have been bankrupt for a very long time. There's a real rise of the Kahanist elements within Israeli society. They're very strong. They're everywhere. And to the point where the head of the Shabak, the Internal Security Service, was starting to investigate them, which is why, he was just recently being fired. Now the courts are saying that his firing was illegal. So there's a court battle about that. I mean, the collapse of Israel, of what was supposedly a society, is unprecedented. It's all gone to hell. Now add to that, the Yemeni forces and what they've done to the port of Eilat and to the Israeli economy. The fact that people in the north have still, in the settlements of northern Palestine, have still not been able to come back because of what was done, the Lebanese support for the Palestinians and so on. I mean, it's just the whole thing is going to hell. At the same time, they can still continue the genocide because they have the means to do it. They have the hardware and they have enough money and support to continue to do it. So my concern is, and I think this should be all of our concern, is that the genocide is not going to stop until there are such severe sanctions on the state of Israel, on the apartheid state, to a point where it is collapsing. And we're not there yet. It's not at a point where it's collapsing. It's falling apart, but it's not collapsing. It still has enough capital. It still has enough, certainly military hardware, where it can continue to kill thousands and thousands and thousands without interruption. And of course, there is no interruptions because there is no military force that is trying to stop them. And I think that they will continue until, as far as they're concerned, the job is done. And when you listen to Israeli members of cabinet, to the Israeli politicians, to the Israeli press, to Israelis on the streets, to posts that people put up on social media, the discourse is, let's keep killing and killing and killing and killing. The only argument that you get is from time to time something like, well, let's stop the killing for a little bit till we get the hostages back. And that's really part of what is happening. That's part of the argument, the severe argument that's taking place in Israeli society now. There was just a letter that was posted in the Israeli press by almost 1,000 reservists from the Israeli Air Force, demanding that they stop the killing. They call it a war, but stop the killing just long enough to bring in the hostages. Not that there's anything wrong with the killing, Not that there was anything wrong with the genocide, not that we should stop the genocide, but we should all agree on a halt long enough to bring the Israeli hostages back. And so, they will not stop unless there are, like I said, severe sanctions, an arms embargo, things of that nature that will force it to stop. This is not, I don't see an end to this coming from the genocidal regime side anytime soon.
Yeah. And a large part of that effort to push governments to impose sanctions is there in Washington, D.C., where you are. Can you talk about the new project you're involved in, Palestine Freedom House, Dar al-Hurriya in D.C.? Tell us about it and the kind of work that you're doing there.
Sure. So actually, Ali, I've been talking to you about this for several years, and to other Palestinian comrades in Palestine, some of the grassroots activists there, here in the U.S., about the need for a place in Washington, D.C. that is decidedly a Palestinian place, with a Palestinian flag, with the name Palestine, a high-profile place, and finally, so we established an organization in 2023, and last year we actually landed this wonderful location here on Capitol Hill, and we're able to put up a flag. We're just on Pennsylvania Avenue, a few blocks away from the Capitol, so we put up a flag, we put up the name Palestine House of Freedom, and the mission, as you can see on the website, is being that we are a 501c3, is education. But what are we educating for? There's plenty of information out there. So what we did, we identified as perhaps something that we can contribute is to educate to the point that people realize that a peaceful resolution of the war, of the killing in Palestine is possible. The end result of Israelis and Palestinians living in peace is possible. The road between where we are now to that place has to go through dismantling apartheid and replacing it with a free, democratic Palestine with equal rights. So it's a tall order, of course, but we feel very strongly that that's got to be the case. Unless we talk about dismantling apartheid, unless we talk about the fact that a free, democratic Palestine, on all historic Palestine is actually a hopeful, optimistic vision, we're not going to get to where we need to be, because for decades, the other side has branded what these things mean. I mean, you can't even say Palestine without being accused of anti-Semitism, right? You can't even call the country Palestine, even though going back 4,000 years, it was called Palestine until one day in May of 1948. So all of this it seems that this is something that we can contribute to. Now, I say the word education, but we mean, education, the most robust interpretation of the word. And so with using all the means at our disposal, all the means that exist, to push out this message that we have to bring an end to the killing of Palestinians. We have to guarantee the lives, the safety, the security, and the freedom of Palestinians, which have not been guaranteed. There's never even been a conversation about how we protect Palestinians over the last 100 years. So we have to provide that. And the only way to do that, again, is dismantling this genocidal regime that exists in Palestine now and establishing a free Palestine from the river to the sea. And again, bringing back or hammering the point that not only is this not anti-Semitic, not only is this not a negative thing, it's a positive, optimistic outlook that will finally bring an end to the suffering of the Palestinian people and will also benefit the oppressors. It will benefit the Israelis, not as oppressors, but as people who live in a country, in a normal country, where everybody enjoys the same privileges. So that's really what we're trying to do here. And the fact that we're so close to the Capitol is very useful, because we do get people that work here, people that are involved in this decision-making process, come in, listen, we go there, we talk to them. The proximity, is the symbolism, I think, is important, to have a space with a Palestinian flag that is decidedly Palestinian. We're not about dialogue. We're not about, any of that sort of thing. We're a place for Palestine and a safe space. And we have a very large space here. So we have events. We just had an event for Land Day. There's a large protest here during Land Day, or, the Land Day weekend, which was last weekend. It wasn't on Land Day because of Eid. But, after the protest, people came here as a place to, get together and talk and relax. And then the next day we had our events. And the events that we put together have to do with either with Palestinian issues, with the Palestinian calendar, important days on the Palestinian calendar, and so forth. And again, the objective is to be another, and not so much as an organization, but another perhaps voice, which is clearly in touch with what is happening, with the grassroots activism that's happening in Palestine. And with this desire to take this, this energy that exists in the streets and plug it into the places where decisions are made, because right now we're not given a seat at the table at all in the places where decisions are being made. And that's something we want to change.
Well, Miko, it's true that we've talked about this idea, and in the meantime, it's become a reality. So congratulations to you and all who've helped to make Palestine Freedom House a reality. I haven't had the chance to visit yet, but I'm looking forward to doing that. And people can check out the events. I'm looking at the calendar at the daralhurriya.org website and seeing that you have regular film screenings and regular events. So people who are in the Washington, D.C. area or who are visiting can maybe join some of the events and learn more about what you're doing. Miko, you are the author of The General's Son, and you're also the author of Injustice, which covers the history of the Holy Land 5 Foundation case. And you are an outspoken advocate for justice in Palestine, and we are very grateful to you for joining us today. And we appreciate your time, and we hope to see you back here on the Electronic Intifada live stream before too long.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Miko. Always good to hear from him.
Yeah. And speaking of films, I just want to mention, by the way, and this, of course, relates to our topic with Miko. I saw this week The Encampments. This is the incredible film.
It is. I saw it too.
It's really powerful. It's about the anti-genocide encampments on college campuses that happened in the spring and summer of 2024. It focuses on Colombia. It focuses on Mahmoud Khalil. So you get to know him and who he was and the role he played, the reality of it, not the lies and propaganda of the government. And it was an exceptional film. Full disclosure, I actually appear in it for a couple of minutes, but the real, it really is incredible storytelling by the people who are involved, including Mahmoud Khalil, and really giving the lie to the claim that campuses are, rife with anti-Semitism. You have people in the film saying, where there is no, all these claims and not a single incident of anti-Semitism was surfaced. It's very similar to what we're going to talk about next, in a way, the Israeli mass rapes claim, where you have all these people talking about it matter-of-factly when there isn't even a single case. Anyway, I just wanted to mention this. And this film is on theater release in various cities around the United States. I don't know, honestly, if it's viewable in other countries yet. You can't see it online. You can see it in theaters. Go to the website of the encampments and find out more. And if you can see it, I strongly recommend it. It was really powerful.
Same. Yeah, I saw it the other night with some friends, and it was so moving and beautiful. These students who have put everything on the line for Palestine and really, trying to get their institutions to live up to the standards that they should. And it was just, I was blown away at how quickly the filmmakers were able to get this film out, and just with such care and intention. It was just a beautiful, very moving film. So yes, highly recommend.
Yeah, and it took vision for them to understand in real time, right from the beginning, how historic these events were, and to be there to record them. And you feel the weight of the history when you see it. And one other thing I want to say is that we're very proud that, because also they filmed in Gaza. Of course, the filmmakers in the US could not go to Gaza, but they worked with Rouaida Amer, who is a filmmaker in Gaza and has been a long-time contributor to the Electronic Intifada. And the camera work and the footage and filming and journalism she did in and from Gaza that is in the encampments is stunning.
Yeah, it's exceptional. I know. I was just so moved in so many ways by how it was portrayed, and Rueda's contributions was just, it was perfect. So yes, well, I'm sure we'll have more on the encampments in later broadcasts, because I want to talk more about it. It's beautiful. But moving right along, you are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman here with my colleague Ali Abunimah. We have an update on one of the key figures who appeared in the Sheryl Sandberg film Screams Before Silence. That was the film released around this time last year, which was promoted as a, quote, documentary film on the sexual violence committed by Hamas on October 7th, 2023. But a year ago on the Electronic Intifada live stream, we exposed Screams Before Silence as a total fraud. And you can find that segment on our YouTube channel. Or you can also find it in the article by Ali from last May, headlined Debunking Screams Before Silence, Sheryl Sandberg's 7 October mass rape film. Sandberg is, of course, the billionaire former Facebook executive who has been a key force in promoting Israel's atrocity propaganda and lies about what happened that day. She's currently promoting and appears in a new film called October 8th, which purports to be a documentary about, quote, the explosion of anti-Semitism on college campuses. And it smears the Palestine solidarity movement as being pawns of Hamas, Iran, China, and Russia. But today we're going to be talking about one of the characters in Screams Before Silence, a man called Rami Davidian, an Israeli who claimed to have rescued hundreds of Israelis on October 7th. He's also a key witness for Israel's mass rapes narrative. He's just been exposed, as we discussed last week, by Israeli mainstream journalists as a total fraudster. An expose of Davidian's fabrications and lies was set to be broadcast by Israel's Channel 13 last Sunday, until the network's CEO stepped in and ordered the report to be censored. And that is causing an uproar in Israel. Ali, before we get into the new developments, remind us who Rami Davidian is.
Yeah, Rami Davidian describes himself as a farmer from Moshav Patish, an Israeli colony a few miles east of Gaza. And as we've reported before, he's been treated as a national hero in Israel for his supposed exploits on October 7th, 2023. For example, he was invited to participate in Israel's official Independence Day celebrations last year, which were broadcast on national television. Here's a clip of that.
Rami Davidian, ממושב פטיש, בן שרה ועזריה זיכרונם לברכה, מסי משואה זו, לכבודכם האחים והאחיות שלנו, שלא הצלחתי להציל. אין יום שאנחנו לא חושבים עליכם.
Yeah, and he said basically that I'm Rami Davidian from Moshav Patish. This is a tribute to you, our brothers and sisters, who I did not succeed in saving. There is no day that I do not think about you. And The Israeli government set up an official website honoring the so-called heroes invited to participate in the Independence Day ceremony. And there's a whole page dedicated to Davidian's heroism. It states, quote, "Hundreds of the survivors of the Nova Party owe their lives to one man. For an entire day, Rami Davidian from Moshav Patish rescued survivors from every possible location, from the fields, the orchards, and the party, while enlisting the help of family and friends to help with the rescue mission." And it concludes, "For risking his life to save many lives from incessant fire, Rami Davidian was chosen to light a torch on the 76th Independence Day of the State of Israel." And in addition to being celebrated in Israel, where he has given countless lectures and inspirational talks, he's also gone on international speaking tours to Italy, and he's traveled to universities and synagogues across the United States. I found stories about him speaking at Duke University, North Carolina, at the University of Texas, as well as at venues in Ohio and Florida. Take a look at this event, which was held at a private home on Long Island, New York last June, titled "An Evening with Rami Davidian, the Hero of the Nova Festival Attack." The ticket prices started at $118 per person, and they say in the invitation, quote, "All donations will go directly to Rami and his family, as he is unable to work and needs our support." And here's a crowdfunder set up for Rami Davidian by a pro-Israel activist in California. It's titled "Support Israeli Hero Rami Davidian," and it has raised more than $84,000. It also claims that Davidian is suffering from trauma and that, quote, "Rami is unable to work right now. He needs our help." So these are the kinds of speaking events he's been doing, directly profiting from his claims of heroism and carrying out propaganda work on behalf of the Israeli government.
And remind us what role Davidian played in the Sheryl Sandberg film Screams Before Silence.
Yeah, Sandberg presented Davidian as a key witness for the supposed mass rapes on October 7th. And as regular viewers and readers of the Electronic Intifada will know well, we have thoroughly debunked that whole narrative. To this day, there is not a single credible corroborated claim of rape on that day, and not a single positively identified victim of a rape, living or dead. So Davidian played a key part in the effort to shore up a narrative that had already crumbled. And let's actually go back to that Electronic Intifada live stream episode from May 1st, 2024, when we were the first journalists, as far as I know, to examine Davidian's claims critically and conclude that they could not possibly be true. But before we roll this clip, I just want to warn people that it does contain frank discussion of alleged sexual violence. This is a clip of a man called Rami Davidian, who claims to have single-handedly rescued hundreds of people from that supernova rave on October 7th.
כבר ראיתי בחורות קשורות עם הידיים כפות. מישהו רצח אותם, אנס אותם, תעלל בהם, פה בעצים האלה. הרגליים שלהם היו פתוחות. מי שרואה זה יודע שהתעללו בבנות. מישהו הפשיט אותם, מישהו אנס אותם. החדירו לעברים הפנימיים שלהם כל מיני דברים, כמו קרשים, כמו ברזלים. מעל 30 בנות נרצחו ונאנסו פה. הייתי צריך לסגור את הרגליים שלהם, לחסות את הגופות שלהם. שאף אחד לא יראה מה שאני ראיתי, אף אחד. אף אחד לא יכול לראות דברים כאלה.
It's okay.
I don't know what to say about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, just to summarize for those who are listening and couldn't read the subtitles. So Rami Davidian, they're standing in the forest where this supernova rave took place, and he claims that he saw women tied to trees, who had been raped, who had been burned, who had had objects like iron rods and wooden boards inserted into their private parts. And then he says that, no one else was around, according to him. It was just him. And then he says what he did is that if their legs, again, I'm sorry about how graphic this is, but if their legs were spread, he closed their legs, he covered everything up, and he said, so no one else could see. No one else could see. So what's interesting about that is if we are to believe what he's saying, then he is admitting that he actually tampered with a major crime scene in order to destroy the evidence of the things he says he saw, so that no one else could ever see them. And that turns out to be very convenient indeed, because Rami Davidian is a huge liar.
Yeah. And in that live stream from a year ago, it looks like I've aged about 10 years since then, you went on to explain in detail about why you concluded that Davidian was a liar, both about the mass rape crime scene we just heard him describe to Sheryl Sandberg, as well as the heroic rescues he claimed to have carried out. And listeners and viewers can go back and watch that live stream to see the rest of that report. But bring us up to date. What's happened in the last year since?
Well, what happened is that the source, 𝐓𝐴, an investigative news show on Israel's Channel 13, prepared a report that was set to air this past Sunday, exposing Rami Davidian as having fabricated those tales of heroism. You can actually see the trailer of the program, which is titled Rami Davidian, The True Story. But on Friday, the show's anchor, the high-profile Israeli journalist Raviv Drucker, revealed that the network had decided to cancel the broadcast. I think, as you said, we mentioned that last week. In a post on Twitter X on April 4th, Drucker wrote, quote, today in the early afternoon, the CEO of Channel 13, Emiliano Kalemzuk, called and said that he decided not to broadcast the segment on Rami Davidian that was scheduled to be broadcast on Sunday.
And did he explain why the broadcast was canceled?
Drucker says that he pushed back forcefully and asked the CEO to watch the report, but ultimately the decision not to air it was final. Drucker does not spell out why, but to many observers it was obvious. The trailer apparently created a backlash from Davidian's supporters, perhaps even from higher powers. We don't know for sure. Given the heavy investment in Davidian as a hero and witness of October 7th, including by the Israeli government and its international propaganda apparatus, his exposure is definitely a huge embarrassment.
Yeah. Did Raviv Drucker give any details of what the Channel 13 investigation found out about Davidian, or was it kind of vague?
He gave some broad outlines, and this is what Drucker wrote about Davidian's stories. Quote, these are not slight exaggerations, mildly inflating the number of those rescued. Absolutely not. These are stories made up from beginning to end, hair-raising stories that never, ever occurred. I wrote about that in an article for the Electronic Intifada that we published on Friday, and that's actually what I meant. We didn't discuss this on the live stream last week, but we did report it on the website. And the headline there is, key 7 October mass rapes witness denounced as liar by Israeli reporter. But since I wrote that article, more details have come out. On Saturday, that was on April 5th, Drucker published a second post on Twitter with a statement from Itai Rom. Rom is the Channel 13 journalist who actually led the investigation into Davidian.
Right. And what did Itai Rom reveal?
Well, Rom revealed a lot more. He said, he started off by saying, quote, because the management of Channel 13 has frozen the broadcast of the investigation, at this stage we cannot explain to you exactly which lies are involved and which are the correct facts. But 𝐓𝐡𝐞 does indicate that this was a very detailed investigation that uncovered a massive fraud by Davidian. The reporters clearly spoke to a lot of people, and both Raviv and Drucker also say that many of the leads that led to the unraveling of Davidian's tales were from people who had been at those places on October 7th, and so could falsify what Davidian has been saying. Rom gives this overview of what the investigation found. Quote, "We discovered stories that are breathtaking cinematic scenes, but any connection between them and reality is purely coincidental. We saw hundreds of people thirstily drinking his words in lectures, shedding tears and clapping with excitement and admiration in response to absurd and fabricated descriptions of heroism. We discovered rescues that Davidian tells about that really happened, but they weren't carried out by him, but by other people." End quote. So that's what Rom says now. I want to show you one other clip from our live stream from a year ago of what we said just after we examined one of Davidian's tales of heroism and pointed out how key details in his story changed in the different versions of how he told it. So as you can see there, what you immediately notice there is that these accounts are very different. In the first one, he somehow scares off the 5 armed terrorists who've supposedly come to kill everyone in sight just by scolding them in Arabic. He doesn't say anything about fighting them off with a pipe. He just managed to either charm them or scare them or convince them by pretending to be a Muslim. He is in fact Jewish, but he says he pretended to be a Muslim. In the second story, he heroically knocks 5 armed terrorists, as he calls them, to the ground with nothing but a piece of pipe. I mean, what do you think? How credible is that?
He's watched a lot of movies.
Right. This is like a script from a superhero movie.
Yeah. I forgot about that.
It was obvious to us that it was like a movie script, and I just remembered that when 𝐓𝐡𝐞 mentioned, these cinematic scenes that bear no relation to reality.
Right. Do either Raviv Drucker or 𝐓𝐡𝐞 say anything specifically about Davidian's claims regarding the supposed mass rape crime scene that Davidian describes in the Sheryl Sandberg film, Screams Before Silence?
Yes. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 makes clear that they found evidence that Davidian was lying about that too. And he writes, quote, "We discovered that even on the very sensitive issue of the sex crimes committed by the terrorists, Davidian is not exactly careful to tell the truth." He doesn't go into more detail than that, though.
Yeah, interesting. What does he say about the cancellation of the broadcast and the backlash against Channel 13 for even doing this report?
Clearly, both Raviv Drucker and 𝐓𝐡𝐞 are very angry, understandably. And Rom says this, quote, "When we set out, we wanted, like many other media outlets in Israel and around the world, to tell the story of Davidian on October 7th, with one difference. We decided not only to turn on the camera and let Davidian speak, but to do something else that is a little less common, to check things out." He goes on, "This sin, the sin of fact-checking, is now the subject of great public outrage." And then 𝐓𝐡𝐞 adds, "If we had acted like the rest of the media and simply let Davidian speak without checking the facts, there would have been no problem broadcasting the report. Because we did check, a campaign has emerged in recent days that asserts Davidian's right to lie to the public in countless interviews and lectures, and even to raise funds from donors who believe that his financial situation is difficult, and to block us from telling the public why these are lies." End quote. And according to Rom, Davidian told the Channel 13 team that he is not in financial need, and claims that some of these fundraisers, which state clearly and publicly that all the money will go to him personally, that they were started without his knowledge.
Ali, what can we take from this?
Well, once again, massive Israeli lies have been exposed, and once again, it was independent media who got there first. We told everyone that Rami Davidian was a liar a year ago, and all we did here at the Electronic Intifada was do our jobs as journalists of looking at things skeptically and critically and asking the right questions. Even without the massive investigation undertaken by Channel 13, we found enough discrepancies, enough things that just didn't add up, that we could say with confidence that we were looking at a liar and a fraud. And then, when it comes to the detailed expose of the hoax, it came from within Israel itself. Channel 13 is, of course, an Israeli channel, but as the journalist there said, it was disgruntled Israelis themselves who brought the truth out. I think another very important message is that this is not just about Rami Davidian. His lies would not have gone anywhere without this huge Israeli government and Israel lobby propaganda apparatus and the complicity of Western media.
Yeah. Remind us of some of the ways that this particular hoax was promoted in the U.S. and used to manufacture consent for this genocide.
Yeah, well, you can see that Screams Before Silence was heavily pushed in US media. Here, for example, is a tweet from the New York Times promoting an article by Bret Stephens claiming that, quote, to watch Screams Before Silence is to be disabused of any lingering doubts about what Hamas did. That article explicitly mentions Rami Davidian. It was also promoted in the Washington Post, and Davidian is also mentioned in that article as a credible witness. The film was screened on campuses across the United States. It was even screened at the White House by Vice President Kamala Harris during the Biden administration, which undoubtedly gave it enormous publicity and credibility. And here's Sheryl Sandberg herself talking to CNN's Jake Tapper on April 30th last year, promoting Screams Before Silence.
And I'm hoping that when people can hear firsthand in this documentary from witnesses, from first responders, from people, heroes who walked into fields trying to save people. And I stood in the field with this amazing man, Rami, and he showed me trees and he said, crying, there were naked women tied to these trees, bloodied, legs spread, crying that he didn't get there early enough to save them. I hope when people see this, they will stop denying this happened or stop ignoring this happened and put some of that moral energy and some of that outrage to this issue as well.
So you can hear Sheryl Sandberg directly referencing Rami Davidian in order to shame people into believing the mass rapes narratives and the lies he told. And Jake Tapper and CNN have been a major platform for this and other October 7 hoaxes, atrocity propaganda, and fabrications. I've written to Jake Tapper to ask him if he plans to inform CNN's viewers about how they were misled by Sandberg. We will let people know if we get an answer, but I haven't received one so far. It's also notable that more recently, Davidian's lies are cited as evidence in a report by an all-party group of British lawmakers, the so-called 7 October Parliamentary Commission. And by the way, there are indications, they don't name him, but there are indications that match up with, or accounts that match up with Rami Davidian's lies in that UN report by Pramila Patten published last year. So they appear to have relied on him too.
Wow.
So not only was Davidian's fake testimony used to justify Israel's genocide, but while Davidian was paraded around as a saintly humanitarian and courageous rescuer, all the while enriching himself, he actually used his newfound fame to directly incite genocide and extermination of Palestinians, something you never see in the many glowing media reports treating him as a hero. But here he is speaking on an Israeli podcast called 𝐓𝐡𝐞 last year, calling on Israel to, quote, wipe out Gaza. There's nothing good about them.
למחוק את עזה. למחוק את עזה. אין טוב בהם. גם נהרוג להם 10, 20, 30, 100,000, 2,000, 20,000. זה לא יעזור. הם רוצים להשמיד אותנו כעם, כיהודים. גם עכשיו נעשה מה שתעשה, זה יחזור. 7 באוקטובר הבא יחזור והם יהיו יותר חכמים, כי אם נסתכל על ההיסטוריה, בכל מבצע הם יותר חכמים מאיתנו, הם לומדים הרבה יותר מהר מאיתנו.
Yeah. So there he is. He's saying no matter how many Palestinians we kill, it won't be enough unless we wipe them all out. That's what Rami Davidian says. This great humanitarian, this bleeding heart.
Yeah.
And Sheryl Sandberg's film, in which his lies, not just the lies of Rami Davidian, but the lies of others whom we identified and exposed last year, was used, is still being used to distract and justify from this ongoing genocide. Many people were complicit in this, but now that yet another hoax has been definitively debunked, there is silence in US media. Ironically, there are reports in Israeli media about the Davidian expose and Channel 13 canceling the broadcast, but I found nothing in the New York Times, nothing in the Washington Post or in any other mainstream US publication. So as usual, Nora, it's left to us and a few other small outlets to tell people the truth.
That's right. Well, I'm sure we'll continue to keep watching this and continue to keep debunking these just atrocious, disgusting lies. And thanks, Ali, for being so dogged about chasing this one and exposing Sheryl Sandberg. I mean, just I don't know, her such obvious manipulation of people, and in promoting this new documentary, apparently that is supposed to show how evil college students are for not wanting a genocide.
And they're promoting it at a time when college students are being picked up by secret police and whisked off to distant detention centers.
Right.
It's evil what they're doing.
It is evil.
This propaganda to portray college students as pawns of Hamas and China and Iran and to demonize them. It's evil what Sheryl Sandberg and anyone else who's involved in this film are doing. But the antidote to these lies is the truth that we tell you here at the Electronic Intifada. And by the way, once again, the Encampments as a film is the truthful counterpoint to this disgusting fake narrative of campuses being overrun by anti-Semitism.
That's right. Thanks for that, Ali. And you are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. Let's bring on Jon for the Resistance Report. Hey, Jon.
Hi, guys. Disgusting.
Hi, Jon.
I know.
All I got to say
I know.
That.
It's bottomless. It is bottomless, and it's unrelenting, and
it was obvious from the first day. I just want to say that. We said that in the first day. There's no evidence. We watched videos for days constantly. There's no evidence for what is being said. We said that right away on this show.
Right.
We looked for it. Just disgusting.
It is. Yeah. It is, once again. Well, there is a lot to talk about this week from both Gaza and Yemen. So let's get right into it.
Let's do it. You are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada. I'm Jon Elmer. This is the Resistance Report for day 552. It's also 18 months, a year and a half since the war began, and we are today on day 40 of a total siege of Gaza. No food, no medicine, no fuel, none of the agreed upon machinery or housing that was supposed to get in, not enough tents, violations of the ceasefire in every way by Israel, including the resumption of the war, the squeezing of the buffer zones. Let's take a look at the map here so people can get our footing. We have buffer zone pressed in the north, Beit Hanun, Beit Lahia, biting into Jabalia, which we'll show you coming up. The Netzarim corridor is 60% occupied up to the Salahuddin road that you can see running through between the words Netzarim and corridor there. So corridor of that word is all cut off. There's no road traffic along the main north-south highway in Gaza. And of course, as Nora reported, complete destruction of Rafah. And as I reported last week on the show, cutting the corridor, the Morag corridor between Rafah and Khan Yunis. Israel has carried out more than 1,000 airstrikes. They've killed 500 kids, and they're still not fighting any battles on the ground, face-to-face with the resistance. They're still operating in the buffer zone, carrying out these massacres with shelling, with drone strikes, with airstrikes, consistently at a pace that we had not seen in many months towards the end of the war. In a lot of ways, what we're looking at seems to match the period of October 2023, when there was massive airstrikes, unprecedented airstrikes in Gaza. We have the same kind of operational tempo. This weekend, the Israeli military said they carried out 150 airstrikes just in the 2-day weekend. They're carrying 50 a day each day, and that's why you have the disgusting toll that Nora so well reports on at the beginning of the show. So if you're just watching this as a segment, you should go and check out Nora's news report for the human rights situation. If we look at the next map, I'm going to show you a couple of Israeli military maps here. These are the again, the appalling grid maps that they've been using all throughout this war. But you can see the grayed-in area is the buffer zone now. This is a bite out of Jabalia, the Jabalia camp in the north, forcing people out of that area and making an increased buffer zone, now more than 2 kilometers in the north. If we look at the next slide, you can see here pressing in Shujaiya, east of Gaza City, pressing on the edges of Shujaiya, but it doesn't matter. These evacuation notices, they're still bombing on the other side of that evacuation notice that you can see there. And they killed yesterday in a strike 38 people. They're still digging with hand trowels and bare hands because Israel won't allow fuel or machinery into Gaza. 8 people are still missing in that massacre, despite the fact that Israel claims that these maps are warning people about where the strikes are. Abu Ubaidah sent a message this week. He said half of the enemy's living captives, so there's 59 captives left in Gaza that are believed to be 22 alive. That's me saying that. Back to Abu Ubaidah, half of the enemy's living captives are located in the areas the occupation army demanded to be evacuated in recent days. We have decided not to transfer these captives from these areas, keeping them under strict security measures, knowing that these measures place their lives at extreme risk. And if the enemy is concerned about the lives of these captives, it must negotiate immediately for their evacuation or their release. Had the Israeli government been concerned about them, the captives, it would have adhered to the agreement signed in January, and most of these people would have been home if that was the case. So you can see again just the tightening of the siege, the increasing of the buffer zones in Gaza. If we look at the next map, this is 3. Yeah, this is 3. So this is an operation in Shujaiya. This is a previously dug IED here. This is Soraya Al-Quds Islamic Jihad. This was buried before, and now you're watching on a closed circuit television camera as a Merkava tank enters the eastern edge, and you can see in that CCTV footage that they are right on the edge of Shujaiya. So they're just pushing the buffer zones, expanding them. They're not moving into built up areas and fighting the resistance. And it's very difficult for the resistance to access the buffer zones in many ways, other than the breach of the wall on October 7th, which was a technical feat. To attack the Israeli military in the buffer zone is the equivalent to raiding their territory the way they're set up. So you can't, there's a lot of people asking where the resistance is right now. The resistance is asking probably where the Israelis are right now, because they're not in these areas. There's been operations throughout the week that demonstrate where the fighters are, that the fighters are on the battlefield. The PFLP Abu Ali Mustafa brigades, the DFLP National Resistance Brigades, Saraya al-Quds, all been capturing drones, Israeli drones, which suggest that those drones are exiting the buffer zone and are into the battlefield areas where the fighters are. So those are getting captured, which gives you an indication. But the Israeli military, speaking to Haaretz yesterday, said that they've been told to move very, very slowly. Army radio reported that as well, that their commanders are telling them to not, to be safe, to not, they're not interested in taking casualties right now. The war is not popular with the soldiers, and they're playing it safe. But in playing it safe, they're pushing the buffer zones and squeezing the population of Gaza. So that Saraya al-Quds operation was on Sunday, but it was a previously buried IED, and that's the second operation like that where the Israelis have hit a previously set IED. The previous one was 2 weeks ago in east of Khan Yunis. So you can see that we know from previous battles that once the Israelis move into what is the battlefield, that there will be IEDs, there will be booby-trapped houses, and we haven't seen any of those face-to-face operations. There was 2 reports this week of clashes between the resistance and the Israelis, but nothing that would be like a ground war. And there's many reasons for that, the ones that I just gave you, but also I think that Qassam is adhering to the ceasefire. They're not carrying out a low probability operation that will set the ceasefire negotiations back, and Israel just wants to show their population that they're squeezing Gaza without actually fighting. Excuse me. If we look at number 5, you can see the map in Rafah. Again, they're cutting all of Rafah off. The Morag corridor is along that line. You can see they haven't completed the full corridor. But Army Radio reported just this morning that the IDF a few weeks ago submitted a document to the Knesset Security Cabinet that says that only 25% of Qassam's tunnels have been destroyed. So 75% of Qassam's tunnels remain intact in the Gaza Strip, and Qassam has more than 20,000 fighters, which is very close to the number that they had when the war began. Israel's number was 26,000 fighters before the war began. And the Israeli military chief of staff, Eyal Zamir, visited Rafah this week, and he said to the Israeli soldiers, "I expect you to defeat the Rafah Brigade." The Rafah Brigade, as longtime listeners of this show will know, was said to be defeated in June, in the summer. Then later in the summer, they said they really defeated them. Halevi, the chief of staff, said that the 162nd Division had totally defeated the Rafah Brigade. Of course, we know that's not true. That was in September, and then in October, we saw the death of Yahya Sinwar in Tel Sultan, and then after that, we saw a number of operations that we broke down on this show that were Operation Avenging Sinwar. So the resistance was still functioning fully in Rafah, and now we have today from Army Radio, according to the IDF, this is a quote, according to the IDF, there are 2 functioning battalions left in Rafah and 3 left in Khan Yunis. There's only 4 battalions, according to the Israelis, in both of those places. So you're saying half of the battalions in Rafah and 3 out of 4 in Khan Yunis. They fought in Khan Yunis for 8 months. They fought in Rafah for 10 months. And now they're saying that they said, the quote from Halevi on September 12th was, we have completely disbanded the Rafah Brigade. This just lies. The lies, this whole show has been covering Israeli lies. But as Nora pointed out, as these lies are being told, what's happening on the ground in that shaded area that you see on the left of the screen there, that's Rafah. And as the government media office said, more than 90% of homes have been destroyed in the Rafah governorate, which is 20,000 buildings with 50,000 housing units, to repeat what Nora said. So let's take a look at the next one, because Qassam this week also launched a barrage of rockets. You can see S-55s here. These are heavy warhead, medium range rockets. You can see the rocket launcher system there. Presumably, this is a buried system. You can see the dirt there that implies that it's a buried launcher. S-55s have a 55-kilometer range. That's the way the rocket naming goes. And a 50 kilogram warhead. So it's a significant rocket. On that sign, you can see the date that this was from Sunday. You see them launching their Iron Peace Enforcer rocket launcher, and on the rocket launcher pad. Now we're going to hear them from the other side. So those are the S-55s. There was a barrage of at least 10 rockets fired. It was one of the larger barrages in the last many months, and the Israelis pointed that out. The Israeli military pointed that out, although they always say they knocked them down. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 also carried out rocket operations hitting the Nahal Oz military base. So the rocket attacks are the response to the positioning of the Israeli forces. They're not in a position that the resistance can reach them in the buffer zone. That may change, and I've been saying that every week, that may change any moment. As soon as the Israelis push into the built-up areas, the territorial brigades will be there to defend the territory, as they have all throughout this battle. So that's Gaza. Let's turn now to Yemen. On the Yemen front, with the Yemeni forces are battling the U.S., in order to that the U.S. is fighting in order to protect Israel's genocide. The Yemenis have been clear that the blockade of the Red Sea and shipping to Israel and by Israel is a response to Israel's ceasefire violations that were negotiated and guaranteed by the United States. So the United States is fighting against its own agreement here. If we look at number 8, we can just take a look at the map to get a sense of where this battle is. The battle's in the Red Sea. In the upper portion, you see Israel there. To the left, you see Egypt. And in Saudi Arabia, in Saudi waters there, that's where the USS Truman carrier strike group is. And then down at the bottom of your screen, you can see Yemen and that tight squeeze. The choke point there is the Bab el-Mandab, and that is the entrance into the Red Sea, which has been all but shut down to civilian shipping by the Ansar Allah Yemeni armed forces blockade. Although it's been reported this week that there are still 0 attacks on commercial vessels, but transits are down 70% through the Bab el-Mandab into the Red Sea, which goes up into the Suez Canal and into the Mediterranean. So ships are taking the long route all the way around Africa. And the U.S. Central Command, who's overseeing this battle, has described it as a 24/7 battle. And the U.S. Navy attacks have been attacked by the Yemeni forces on some days 2 and 3 times in a 24-hour period. Abdel Malik al-Houthi, the leader of Ansar Allah, said this week that America does not intimidate us, nor do we consider it dominant. The U.S. has moved towards aggression against our country as part of its participation with the Israeli enemy and its aggression against the Palestinian people. Their aggression is escalating. They're using B-2 stealth bombers, and some days there's more than 90 air raids. The American aggression is not able to stop the military operations supporting the Palestinian people, nor was it able to provide protection for Israeli navigation in the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, or the Arabian Sea. So total failures. And Abdel Malik al-Houthi also warned this week, he warned all Arab regimes and countries neighboring Yemen not to get involved with the Americans in supporting the Israelis, not to cooperate, not to allow their countries to be used as bases for attacks. So that seemed like a threat to them. It's not clear if he's talking about hosting missile defense systems, because I reported last week that multiple Patriot batteries and a THAAD battery were being moved into the area, which suggests more into Saudi Arabia. The THAAD arrived in Israel at Nevatim Air Base in the south from the Americans, and Nevatim Air Base is one of the air bases that the Yemeni ballistic missiles target regularly. And Abdulmalik al-Houthi said, "We are in advanced position at the naval level, and the aircraft carrier Truman is constantly on the run, and its pursuit of it, and our pursuit of it, is continuing. The aircraft carrier Truman is constantly under attack as it flees further north in the Red Sea." If we look at the next map, you can get a sense of where their buildup is here. This is a map by Ian Ellis, who's an open source tracker tracking naval data, satellite imagery, U.S. Navy fleet tracking, and AIS data. A lot of this is all open source data that is different than the Israeli battle space, where the Israeli military can censor all of this material. The Americans can't censor this open source material, so we're able to track the ships where they are exactly. And you can see Diego Garcia down there. That's in the Indian Ocean. That's what's hosting the B-2 bombers, and the B-2 bombers are the stealth bombers, heavy bombers that carry 10 times the ordnance that the F-18s that are taking off from the aircraft carriers can carry. They can also carry the heavy bunker busters, which are being used on the Yemeni's underground missile facilities that are built into the mountains, although they have very little impact bombing into the mountains. But you can see there the Truman carrier group is up in the Red Sea, and you can see the Carl Vinson carrier strike group is coming over from the Indo-Pacific, and it should be in the Indian Ocean in the next 2 or 3 days. You're listening to this report on April 10th, so they should be coming any day now. They'll arrive, and there'll be 2 carrier strike groups fighting the Yemenis so that Israel can carry out a genocide. 2 aircraft carriers carry about 180 fighter jets. So significant escalation when that second carrier gets there. And it was a significant escalation to have 6 B-2 bombers move to Diego Garcia. It's roughly 50% of the active B-2 fleet for the U.S. And so they're obviously committed to this battle for Israel. And that map just shows it. If we look at the next map, we can see this is the kind of tracking that we can get. This is the Copernicus satellite, and the imagery is captured by Tom Bike, who does great open source work tracking these vessels around the world. You can see that the map on the bottom left, the inset map, shows that it's about 500 miles away from Yemen. So they're trying to keep their distance from Yemen because the closer they are, the more arsenal that the Yemenis can hit them with. We'll show that some of that arsenal here. Number 11 is the primary one that they're using. This is an anti-ship ballistic missile. This is the ASIF. And these attacks are generally in waves. They fire these anti-ship ballistic missiles, then they fire cruise missiles. Anti-ship ballistic missiles go fast, cruise missiles go medium speed, and then they fire drones, and the drones go slow speed, and they're in staggered, which provides a bit of a challenge to the air defense systems for the carriers and for the guided missile destroyers that are escorting the carriers. We saw that also with the Iranian attack, where they came in different waves. These are the principal anti-ship ballistic missiles. This is the longer range one that they have. This next one is the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿. It's slightly shorter range. We last saw this in a parade in 2023, so they've surely increased the range of these weapons in the 2 years since then, but we haven't got a chance to see those weapons in the air yet, so we haven't seen the changes. We have to go on these parade images. So this is one of half a dozen. The Ansar Allah, the Yemeni armed forces, have half a dozen anti-ship ballistic missiles, half a dozen anti-ship cruise missiles, and those are constantly being fired on a daily basis. Like I said, sometimes more than one a day, one barrage a day at the U.S. And we can see in this next one, we can hear the story from the American side. This is the top naval, the Navy's top surface warfare officer, so the top naval chief, describing the attack. And he said, in a recent attack, this is from January, so this is from the previous engagements that ended with the ceasefire, because Ansar Allah and the Yemeni armed forces adhered to the ceasefire. And would, the minute the ceasefire goes back in effect, they will adhere to that if the United States also adheres to the ceasefire that they are the guarantors of. But here you can hear Navy top surface office warfare officer, Vice Admiral Brendan McLean. He says, in a recent attack, the destroyer USS Spruance was in a fight where they shot down 3 anti-ship ballistic missiles, 3 anti-ship cruise missiles, and 7 one-way aerial attack drones coming towards them. And in this article, they talk about, so that's from the Navy side, which roughly matches exactly what the Yemeni armed forces say in their field reports every day. And here in this article, he underlines the costs, the missile expenditures of the cost for the Navy. The SM-2 missiles that they're firing are $2.5 million a piece. The SM-6 missiles are about $4 million. The SM-3 Sea Sparrows can range from 10 to 30 million. And so you're talking about spending hundreds of millions of, if not billions of dollars in this battle in the Red Sea. Also of note, Navy manufacturing, they only manufactured last year 17 SM-2 missiles, 12 SM-3s, and 125 SM-6s. So they're firing more than a year's worth of munitions construction. If we look at the next one, you can see the New York Times talked about this earlier this week. They talked about, they got a leak from the Pentagon about the amount of money that has spent. It says U.S. strikes in Yemen, burning through munitions with limited success. In just 3 weeks, the Pentagon has used $200 million worth of munitions in Operation Rough Rider against the Houthi militia, officials said, and that was leaked from a Pentagon official who spoke in a closed session with Congress. So they're spending $200 million plus in this period of time. CNN wrote a report based on some other Pentagon officials that said the number was over $1 billion already. So, and as that's happening, if we look at the next one, the Yemeni armed forces are downing Reapers. They got another 2 this week since you last saw me. This is now 4 that they've gotten since March 2nd, when Israel violated the ceasefire by blockading Gaza. And the 3rd one since March 15th, when the U.S. Moved into this battle. These MQ-9 Reaper drones, they don't have any countermeasures. They're big and silver and shiny metal. They have weapons hanging off the wings. They create a massive radar signature. And the Ansar Allah and the Yemeni armed forces have an indigenously made surface-to-air missile that's destroying them. And honestly, the number of surface-to-air missiles that they have, the 358, can take down these Reapers every time they're in the airspace. So the U.S. doesn't want to get close enough. They need these Reapers to find intelligence to what they can strike with their multi-million dollar munitions. They need the Reapers to get those locations because they don't have troops on the ground, and the air defenses of the Yemenis are able to burn them and leave them in a field like we see here in the desert. This was over Jaf province. And so that's the 18th since the battle in the Red Sea started, and the 22nd Reaper downed since 2017, when the 358 surface-to-air missile came into use. And one more here too to look at. The Yemenis are also attacking Israel. They've launched multiple Yafa drone. This is the Yafa drone that we saw released. This is the promo from July 2024 when we first saw it. And this was the drone that penetrated Israel's air defenses and hit right near the U.S. embassy in Tel Aviv, almost a dead hit. flew out over the sea and came in across the beach from the west. The Israelis weren't expecting that. This week, they've launched multiple drones, presumably this Yafa drone, and the Israelis said it came from the east. So they're not flying it straight up. They're flying them on routes that are attacking from places that they think the Israelis aren't expecting. And that's one of the benefits of this Samad class drone, is that it has 2,500 kilometers range. So you can send it out a few hundred kilometers in either direction and still be able to reach Israel. It carries a 50-kilogram warhead, and there you see its rocket assisted launch there. So this is another development by the Yemeni armed forces. Components and some know-how from Iran, but as Donald Trump said in the White House with Netanyahu the other day, he exclaimed that they make them themselves. That was Trump's, he couldn't believe it. They make them themselves. They make the missiles themselves and underground bases that cannot be bombed, and they make the drones in the same place. So the Yemeni Armed Forces said yesterday, the Yemeni Armed Forces Unmanned Air Force carried out a military operation targeting an Israeli military target in the occupied Tel Aviv region with a Yafa drone. The armed forces, as they fight this battle with all bravery, defiance, and faith, confirm once again, as they have confirmed over the past years, that the great Yemen is unbreakable and will not retreat from supporting and backing the oppressed Palestinian people, and will not surrender to American aggression. It will remain as it was, and as it will always and forever remain, a graveyard for invaders. So that is the resistance report for this week. We have the Yemenis carrying out this battle in solidarity with Gaza, and the increasing push towards war in Gaza as well.
Thank you so much, Jon. Yeah, it's it just continues to be. I mean, just the level, the nature of the airstrikes and air attacks on Gaza. I mean, you know, we always talk about, you've always said for the last 18 months, but also the last 20 years that you've been doing this, is that Israel continues to be the most cowardly army, and you know, so, you know, the ground troops hiding behind the berms and joysticks probably, and, you know, with these unmanned drones sniping people and dropping bombs. It's
when they're dropping bombs, that you know their troops aren't there. So the areas that they're bombing are by definition not a battlefield. Because they don't bomb beside their troops. So the massacre in 𝐓𝐡𝐞 yesterday, that was just heinous. Their troops aren't anywhere near that. They're not fighting on the battlefield. They're just throwing them from a distance and killing children who are in their homes. If they come out of their homes, then they get shot for being out of their homes. So it's just a criminal war.
But the captives might be there. The captives might be there, and they don't care about them either.
Absolutely not. No.
No, I mean, I think it would be better for them if the captives were killed. It's what Netanyahu's been pushing for this entire war.
It's just unspeakable. I know. Just in the last 5 minutes, I got a text from a healthcare provider that I'm in contact with in Gaza, who said that a bomb had just gone off, 400 feet away from a field clinic. And this is happening just over and over and over again.
With no targets. I mean, there's no target bank.
The children are the targets, the hospitals, it's the infrastructure, it's the fire engines, it's the paramedics, it's, you know, and it's just children and children and children every single day. I mean, the last week, the level of just these heinous crimes against children. I mean, I counted. It's horrible. I counted, 3 children in one day who were decapitated or whose limbs were completely shredded, and
we've seen the videos.
We've seen the videos. There's no
beheaded babies. These are the beheaded babies,
right.
Day after day for 552 days of beheaded babies. Palestinian babies.
I couldn't stop thinking about that this week. I mean, you know, I'm sure we said this. I know we said this very early on. They are inventing this lie of the beheaded babies in order so that they can decapitate real Palestinian babies, and that is literally what we've been seeing all along.
And the corporate media is that's right, and the corporate media is playing around. Yeah, they're playing. They're you know, they're propping this up. They don't. You know, you'd never see that in the New York Times or CNN. You know, a father holding up the shredded torso of his toddler. And this is, you know, the fact that the Palestinians have to document this themselves, that their pain and suffering is on display. It's not even a private thing anymore. And still, you know, in order to elicit a modicum of empathy and compassion and outrage, and through the last 18 months of this, every single day that a child's body is being held and rocked and wept over by their parents, it doesn't move anything. It doesn't move the needle. Israel only does it more again and again and again, day after day. I don't know. It's unspeakable. We've run out of words to describe this horror. But this is where we're at. This is what the ruling class has decided should be normal. And that's what we're all fighting about and fighting against. There's so much to discuss. This week, of course, Donald Trump summoned Benjamin Netanyahu to Washington for a meeting on Monday that left everyone, including the Israeli prime minister and his officials, wondering what it was all about. Ali, let's talk a little bit about this. The leaders held talks at the White House, and after Trump's officials announced that a press conference by Netanyahu on Trump after the talks would be canceled, the two appeared before the cameras in the Oval Office anyway and answered a select number of questions. Trump did most of the talking during the nearly an hour of the press conference. I think we have a video, and then Elliot, let's talk about your analysis of this.
Yeah, there's a few clips. Let's take a look at the first one.
Steve Witkoff, President Trump's very able representative, helped us get a deal that got 25 out. We're working now on another deal that we hope will succeed. And we're committed to getting all the hostages out, but also eliminating the evil tyranny of Hamas in Gaza, and enabling the people of Gaza to freely make a choice to go wherever they want. I mean, they should have that choice. And the president put forward a vision, a bold vision, which we discussed as well, including the countries that might be amenable and are amenable to accepting Palestinians of their free choice if they choose to go there. And I think that's the second thing that we discussed. But the hostages came right on top.
Free choice of expulsion from your homeland. What if they have the choice to go back to their lands from where they were expelled? Is that part of the choice? No.
This is like literally what our colleague David Sheen has been saying for many, many years, that Kahanism has completely, it wasn't necessary for a Kahanist party to beat Likud because they've just completely taken over Likud.
Yeah.
You know, this was always what Rabbi Meir Kahane always said, that it would be a voluntary emigration of Palestinians.
It's not ethnic cleansing if it's voluntary.
It's voluntary, but then if they choose not to go, they're going to be expelled anyway. So this is the exact same logic.
Yeah, well, that's not surprising. But what I did think was notable there, and that appears throughout the press conference, is that both Netanyahu and and we'll see Trump doing this in a moment, did confirm that there are still efforts to achieve a ceasefire. So, and to square the circle of getting rid of Hamas's so-called tyranny, and over recent weeks, we've seen them stepping up these efforts we talked about a week or two ago to astroturf anti-Hamas protests in Gaza. But I take that as an admission of failure, that once again, an admission that Netanyahu's so-called military pressure to force Hamas to surrender has failed. And we saw that since March 18th, the horrific massacres, more than 1,500 people killed since March 18th, and hundreds on that first day of renewed mass bombing, failed to force Hamas and the other resistance factions to surrender to Netanyahu's and Trump's terms. And here they are back trying to negotiate. That in itself is notable. Of course, the real bombshell that was revealed here in this press conference was Trump's declaration that the United States and Iran are in direct talks. And let's listen to that second clip of Trump talking about that.
We're having direct talks with. Wait. We're having direct talks with Iran, and they've started. It'll go on Saturday. We have a very big meeting, and we'll see what can happen. And I think everybody agrees that doing a deal would be preferable to doing the obvious. And the obvious is not something that I want to be involved with, or frankly, that Israel wants to be involved with if they can avoid it. So we're going to see if we can avoid it. But it's getting to be very dangerous territory. And hopefully those talks will be successful. And I think it would be in Iran's best interest if they are successful. We hope that's going to happen. And we had just a lot of good talks on a lot of.
Yeah, so those talks are supposedly going to take place in Oman on Saturday, and will reportedly involve Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff and Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. I thought that we'll talk more about this. We'll come back also to some of the points that Jon made in his segment regarding wider regional war. But let's just go into that next clip where Trump talks about the ceasefire. He's asked a question by an Israeli journalist and about getting the hostages or the captives out.
Israelis are watching you now on live show. Good. What is your specific way of getting the hostages out from the horrific captivity?
We are trying very hard to get the hostages out. We're looking at another ceasefire. We'll see what happens. But we want to get the hostages out. The Israeli people want the hostages out more than anything. They want the hostages out. This man is working very hard with us to do that. I mean, I don't know. I hope he's being appreciated because he's been a great leader. He's working very, very hard on the hostages and many other things.
So that's Trump praising Netanyahu for working very hard with us. But again, Trump saying that we're looking at another ceasefire. So again, admission of failure that opening the gates of hell, as they called it, has successfully murdered hundreds more children, but not moved the needle on their goals. And I think I want to we'll do all the clips. So we have one more clip, and then I want to make a few points, and we'll open up the discussion. So why don't we look at this last clip, which also ties together sort of the Gaza situation and the broader regional issue.
Thank you for the chance. Many of Palestinian Americans who voted for you and not for Biden because you've promised them to end the war in Gaza.
Very honored by that vote, too.
The war is still going on and there's no hostage deal. Do you have any update on that?
Well, I'd like to see the war stop, and I think the war will stop at some point that won't be in the too distant future. Right now we have a problem with hostages. We're trying to get the hostages out. We got quite a few of them out, but it's a long process. It shouldn't be that long. We have a big problem that we've done. I think I'll ask Pete to maybe talk about it for a second, because a lot of people are asking. The Houthis, we've been very tough and very successful militarily. We've really damaged them badly. These were people shooting down ships and other things, by the way, flying objects like airplanes. And we've put a major hurt on the Houthis, which nobody's been able to do. We've really hit them hard.
So there's a couple of things there. We've had Trump saying several times that they want a ceasefire and they're working towards it, and he hopes the war will end soon. Those are significant changes from the February 2nd press conference when Netanyahu was last in the White House, when they were talking about opening the gates of hell, and Trump's posts on social media threatening the entire population with Gaza. They're still murdering people. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. But that tone has changed. They seem to have recognized that they're not getting anywhere with that. And Trump saying what Israelis want most is to get the hostages out, and they're certainly not getting that by bombing them and risking killing them. Now, on Iran, let's go back to that. These negotiations are going to happen. And how I read that is that probably, I mean, certainly the United States has recognized that war with Iran would not be a very straightforward thing. And let's see. That it would not be a very straightforward thing, and that it would be not a certain victory. That the stated goal is to destroy Iran's nuclear program, but probably the goal of the neocons and the people who've been pushing for a war with Iran for literally decades is more than that. It's a regime change, maybe reproducing the Syrian scenario and hoping that Iranians will rise up. There have been reports, again, these reports circulate in the media that they want to decapitate Iran and even take out its leadership and do what they did in Syria. It seems like they've realized this would be very, very costly and not secure. And the Iranians, who clearly have a capacity to retaliate against Israel and the United States, we saw that on October 1st when they fired hundreds of missiles at Israel. It was an incredible sight, which I saw with my own eyes. I talked about that on this program. And they could mount an even bigger response. But even for Iran, war is very costly, very risky for the world economy. If Iran were to block shipping, to hit oil facilities in countries where the US has bases, major risks. So they both have a big interest in avoiding war. And I just want to, John, you mentioned that story in the New York Times about the U.S. strikes in Yemen burning through munitions with limited success, which, you talked about. But as if the point wasn't clear enough, that was on, I believe, April 4th. Another story was published in the New York Times on April 8th. And let's take a look at that one. U.S. strikes in Yemen, U.S. commanders worry Yemen campaign will drain arms needed to deter China. And let me read you a few sentences from that. American military officials say the Pentagon might need to dip into stockpiles in Asia to replenish supplies in the Middle East, congressional aides say. U.S. commanders planning a possible conflict with China increasingly concerned that the Pentagon will soon need to move long-range precision weapons from stockpiles in the Asia-Pacific region to the Middle East, congressional officials say. That is because of the large amount of munitions that the United States is using in a bombing campaign in Yemen ordered by President Trump. U.S. readiness in the Pacific is also being hurt by the Pentagon's deployment of warships and aircraft to the Middle East after the Israel-Gaza war began in October 2023, and after Houthi militia forces in Yemen started attacking ships in the Red Sea to support the Palestinians, the officials say. By the way, in parentheses, a rare acknowledgement there of why the Yemeni forces are attacking ships. The American ships and aircraft carriers, as well as service members working on them, are being pushed at what the military calls a high operating tempo. Even basic equipment maintenance becomes an issue under those grinding conditions. And then they say later in the article, several Trump aides, including Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Elbridge Colby, the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, have said that the United States must prioritize strengthening its forces in the Asia-Pacific region to deter China, which is rapidly building up its military and its nuclear arsenal. And then finally, those officials argued that U.S. arms support for Ukraine in its defense against Russia and decades of military campaigns in the Middle East and Afghanistan have siphoned off important resources from Asia. If Israel attacks Iran's nuclear enrichment sites in the coming months and ignites a wider Middle East war, the Trump administration would almost certainly commit more U.S. resources into the region. Now, that article was that the same day that Netanyahu and Trump met? So I think the message here is very clear, both from that chaotic press conference with Trump and from what the U.S. officials are signaling in the New York Times, is that Israel is a distraction. Israel is a burden. Israel is a sideshow to the U.S.'s real target, which is China. And we see that reflected in the trade policy, where Trump almost crashed the U.S. financial system with his tariffs. He eased back on the tariffs against every country except China, where he increased them to 125%. So it seems that this administration is bent on targeting China, which they see as their main superpower rival. And the message to Netanyahu is like, you know, we love you. You're our favorite little genocidal settler colony, but we don't have time for you right now. And we don't have the resources to spare. And we certainly don't want to start a major war with Iran. I'm not saying that could not happen, because the parameters Trump has set for successful talks may mean that an agreement is not possible. So Trump may have cornered himself into a war with Iran. And I have a couple of other things to say about that, but at this point, I want to hear if Nora, Jon, or Asa, if you have anything to add at this point.
Yeah, well, the thing that I said in the resistance report is that they're fighting Ansar Allah alone. They're firing more munitions, more vertical launch munitions than they make in a year. So, and there's no end in sight to this battle in the Red Sea, because they're not going to defeat Ansar Allah. I read from Abdel Malik al-Houthi speech, they're whatever the opposite of giving up, that's what the Yemenis will do. And we have a decade-long, and al-Houthi pointed out, we have a decade-long empirical evidence of that, because they were bombed 25,000 times in a decade by the US-Saudi war. And before that, going back to earlier in the show, the global war on terror after September 11th involved airstrikes in the hundreds in Yemen, covering the decades before that war, the Saudi-US war. So they've been fighting America. America's been attacking Yemen since 2002. So they're not going to be surprised by what's going on. They're ready for it. Their missiles that they develop are they could develop them relatively quickly, and they're in protected underground mountainous region that a ground force isn't going to work. So there's not really many options for the Americans here.
Yeah, I not much to add. I just wanted to say, yeah, it's really interesting how even the New York Times was kind of forced to admit that that the U.S. might have to dip into its stocks, in its various military bases around Asia. And the Houthis, the Ansar Allah, are not backing down, as Jon said.
And for as much as Trump is bragging about we destroyed this, we destroyed that, the bottom line is, as Jon said, ships aren't going up into the Red Sea.
Right.
And the port of Eilat, as Miko Peled reminded us, still completely idle and empty. Yeah. So by the measure they set of forcing Yemen to back off and to allow the shipping to go through, they failed. And they'll continue to fail by the looks of it. And clearly, one of Netanyahu's goals was to, and this was, trailed in the Israeli press in the days before his visit, that because Trump put a 17% tariff on Israel. It wasn't the highest, but it was more than the UK, which was 10%. And, they were surprised that Israel should be treated like that when its economy is already a mess. No slack was cut for Israel in the whole tariff thing. So Netanyahu wanted to go to Washington. He preemptively said, Israel, we're going to lift all the tariffs on the United States and go there and give this as a gift to Trump. And I think he was hoping that Trump would announce, we've made our first trade deal with our good friend Israel, and we're going to roll back the tariffs, and Israel is our best friend, and we want to do that with everyone else too. Come talk to us just like Israel did. Well, let's look at what actually, and in his opening comments in the press conference, Netanyahu did all this thing about the tariffs, and of course this is before Trump's U-turn yesterday. But let's look at how Trump responded when he was asked about whether he would lift the tariffs on Israel that day, which he didn't do. But let's look at that clip.
Plan to reduce the tariffs that your government put on Israeli goods, 17%.
On where?
On Israeli goods, the 17%. Do you plan
well, we're talking about a whole new trade. Maybe not. Don't forget, we help Israel a lot. We give Israel $4 billion a year. That's a lot. Congratulations, by the way. That's pretty good. But we give Israel billions of dollars a year. Billions. It's one of the highest of, and we give a lot of countries money. You wouldn't believe if I said we give Afghanistan a lot of money, didn't it? Because that was a Biden deal, another Biden deal. Not only did he embarrass us with that, but they give them billions of dollars, Afghanistan, right? So, but no, we take good care of our friends, and we don't take care of our enemies. We're not taking care of our enemies anymore, but we do take care of our friends.
So that was pretty funny. It was like, not only did he not take the tariffs off, but it was to remind us, we already give you billions of dollars. And then to compare Israel to Afghanistan as another, country ripping the United States off with billions of dollars. I don't know what he's talking about there, but the point is, he didn't, say how happy he is to be giving them all that money. It sounded kind of passive aggressive to me. Yeah. But that, again, doesn't sound like there's a lot of enthusiasm. And then finally, in terms of the Iran, because before this meeting, there was a lot of speculation among regional commentators around the world. Is Trump inviting Netanyahu to Washington for them to put, the final flourishes on their joint plan to attack Iran? And what it seems like is that Trump summoned Netanyahu to Washington to tell him, we're not in the mood for this right now. You better chill out. And and then yesterday, Trump was asked about this again, and his comments were carried by the Associated Press, which reported that President Donald Trump said Wednesday that Israel would be the leader of a potential military strike against Iran if Tehran doesn't give up its nuclear weapons. And he says Trump made the comments ahead of this weekend's scheduled talk involving U.S. and Iranian officials in Amman. And then this is the quote from Trump, quote, "If it requires military, we're going to have military. Israel will obviously be very much involved in that. They'll be the leader of that, but nobody leads us, but we do what we want to do." Doesn't sound like the US wants to spearhead a war against Iran on behalf of Netanyahu.
It doesn't sound very enthusiastic at all. I mean, that's a way of saying you're on your own almost.
Yes. Now that's just, again, we're reading what they're saying and what the mood is. That doesn't necessarily tell us what they'll end up doing, because Trump made it corner himself into it. But there are signs here that they're not too enthusiastic. And remember that in the leaked signal chat, we discussed this with Helena Cobbin a couple of weeks ago. The Vice President J.D. Vance was saying, why are we doing this? He didn't have the honesty to say we're doing it for Israel, but he claimed we're doing it for Europe. The US has no interest in bombing Yemen. So they may have the same view about Iran.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep reading that as well as we can. It's always very hard circumstances to try and pull the threads of what's real and what's, just Trump talking from the top of his head.
Yeah, I mean, one more thing on this, because I was discussing with one of our mutual friends about the whole tariff thing. What does that tell us? Trump did this massive tariff thing, which was bound to be economically disastrous for the United States and many countries. And as that disaster started to unfold, he kept insisting, I don't care. I'm going to do it. I'm not going to make a U-turn, until he made the U-turn pretty quickly, which also many people, was no longer surprising at this point. He's predictably unpredictable. Had he not made that U-turn, you could have said Trump is someone who is willing to pay a very high price, even if it's damaging to the United States, to get what he wants or get what he thinks should happen, which would have been very bad news for Iran, because, it would have sent a signal that he's willing to pay the price of a war with Iran. But the U-turn tells us that Trump is susceptible to costs. And so I'm not trying to predict what will happen here. That would be foolish, especially with someone like Trump. But I think the key takeaway here is that the U.S. is not in as strong a position as it wants to project.
Yeah, if we want to take the sort of optimistic view, it could be that, they will go back to some sort of ceasefire. There is still the talk of the ceasefire negotiations. And, I think the U-turn with the tariffs is a sort of example of that kind of possibility, where the ending of the ceasefire, saying he's going to unleash hell and all of that, he could be viewing it as a way to sort of appease his supporters like Miriam Adelson, his Zionist supporters, the pro-Israel, the very wealthy Israel lobby funder who we've talked about in the past. And then going back to this, the ceasefire negotiations, not the ceasefire process, the indeterminate way to mask and continue the genocide, but the actual ceasefire that we did have for 2 months. Yes, of course, during that 2 months, Israel violated ceasefire. There were still killings going on. but at least there was some respite from the full-on genocide that we're seeing now. Again, it's Trump, so it's hard to say, but we'll see what happens.
Indeed. And meanwhile, finally, Israel, there's a new public opinion poll out. Americans were asked how they view Israel and the quote unquote Israel-Hamas war at the start of Trump's second term. Ali, why don't you bring us through that?
Yeah, this is from the Pew Research Center, which is a well-respected polling organization. And this struck me because it says, and I'm reading from their release, the public's views of Israel have turned more negative over the past 3 years. More than half of US adults, 53%, now express an unfavorable opinion of Israel, up from 42% in March 2022, before the Hamas attack of October 7, 2023, and the ensuing Israeli invasion of the Gaza Strip. This is the first time I remember a major poll from, a respected polling organization showing a majority of Americans, not a majority of Democrats, not a majority of young people, but a majority of all Americans having a negative view of Israel. And then in this chart, which we see here, which drills down further into these results, this shows the shift since 2022. And you can see again, overall, US adults in 2022, 42% had a negative, unfavorable view of Israel. That's gone up to 53%, a majority now. But you can see even among Republicans and Republican-leaning voters, it's gone from 27% to 37%. Among the young, and you can see that among young Republicans, so those under aged 18 to 49, it's gone from 35% to 50%. So according to this, 50% of Republican and Republican-leaning American adults have a negative view of Israel. Extraordinary results. And then on the Democratic side, where support for Israel has been eroding for many, many years, you can see that the negative views of Israel have jumped from, even among the older voters who tend to be more pro-Israel, from 43% 3 years ago to 66%, 2/3 having a negative view. And among the younger age group, it surges to 71%. And you have to consider that this is in the United States, where the mainstream media has put its whole weight on the scales in favor of Israel and its atrocity propaganda for the last 18 months. And yet, this is where they are. And that, I think, is why we're seeing this draconian censorship, because when the elites lose support for their pet projects and the public is moving away from them, they have to try and beat people. This shifting opinion is the context for that.
Something also to watch. And I think with that, we're seeing Democratic lawmakers working with their Republican counterparts to figure out more ways to literally beat that out of people, especially young people on college campuses, trying to restrict people's speech so much, in collusion with these elite Ivy League universities that aren't capitulating to the Trump administration's demands. They're colluding with the Trump administration's demands. This is something that these Ivies, but also state schools and public university systems have wanted to do for decades. Is they see the rising tide of distaste, to put it mildly, for Israeli policies and the, really the normalization of Palestine solidarity activism on college campuses, and the board of trustees and the regents and all of these administrative bodies that look out for the financial well-being of the administrations. want to make sure that their research grants and their, partnerships and their corporate underwriting of various departments stays intact to enrich themselves, not the students, not academic freedom in general, but themselves. And so I think we're just going to see more of this, sadly, but not surprisingly.
Yeah, but this shift in opinion has been going on for years.
Absolutely.
And the Israel lobby has thrown billions of dollars at trying to turn it around and have utterly failed. And it's inexorable, the decline of support for Israel and in every demographic group.
Yeah.
And I see some people commenting and saying they're surprised that those negative ratings for Israel aren't higher. I mean, that's pretty high when you talk about Democrats or Democratic-leaning people, talking about 71%. And you look at the shift again in the other groups, we're talking now about massive majorities. And I think back a few weeks ago when we had 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜 and �zoe Januzzi from the Apartheid-Free Communities campaign. And you remember 𝐓𝐡𝐞, who was one of the organizers who got those measures, those apartheid-free measures passed in, 5 Vermont towns, and who was going door to door. And he said, in his experience, the opinion polls are underestimating support for Palestine and overestimating support for Israel. That may be the case. It may be that people are too shy to say it, or the way the pollsters are writing the questions and all of that. But it's clear there's a sea change going on. And I think we need to keep that in mind and not be in despair and feel that just because the mainstream media isn't talking about Palestine, that there isn't wide knowledge of what's going on and wide disgust at what Israel is doing. And that should encourage us to keep talking to our friends, to our family, to our neighbors, to keep sharing the information, the articles, letting people know about these live streams and the segments we do. The other independent media, we're not the only ones, of course. We are reaching people and we're changing hearts and minds. And Palestinians in Gaza are changing hearts and minds by speaking directly through social media and sharing their experiences, and sometimes sharing the horrific experiences that we talked about earlier. But it is working. It's working.
Thanks for that reminder, Ali. Especially in these very, very dark and grim times when we feel like it's hopeless, but it's not, of course. Well, let's take a look at the website. I wanted to specifically shout out our colleague Maureen Claire Murphy's feature this week. This is the first time that she's done a Palestine in Pictures roundup since October 2023. And I mean, it's always such an incredibly moving, emotional way to tell people's stories is through these photo essays. And Maureen does this incredible job of collecting and curating images from the previous month, along with statistics and analysis and facts.
Yeah, the first photo there, in that extraordinary image of the iftar in Gaza. If we can go back to that, and I encourage people to go to the electronicintifada.net and see the photo in all its glory, in higher resolution. That's an extraordinary image by Doa Albaz, who's a photographer. She's in Gaza and does incredible work. We're very proud to be featuring her work. And all of these Palestinian photographers in Gaza, that's whose work you're seeing here. And Maureen's writing, which provides like an exceptional summary and analysis of the month's events in a really extraordinary way. And this is a feature that was a regular feature for many years. It was kind of suspended after October 7th, just because, like everything else, it takes an enormous amount of time and effort, and our resources were so limited. And I'm very glad that now we're able to start doing this again. It's an incredible resource.
It really is. And it just, again, just those photos, the shock and devastation and cruelty that Israel continues to carry out hour by hour by hour. It's important to bear witness in so many ways, and this is one of those ways. So go check out Palestine in Pictures for the month of March by our colleague Maureen Claire Murphy. Many other features that we've published. There's news and analysis reports. There's Tamara's report on the West Bank right there up at the top. Thank you, Tamara.
There's a really good analysis, which I just had time to skim because it was literally published, this morning as we were getting ready for the program, by our colleague 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 about the Palestinian Authority and its role in trying to basically help Israel to impose its will on Gaza. And then right under that, we have Tamara Nassar's article on the continued horrific Israeli assault in the West Bank, which is on a vast scale that is still overshadowed by the genocide in Gaza, but really needs to be talked about much more too.
Absolutely. And she focuses on, and I quoted from it in the news report earlier, but she focuses on the systematic hunting and murder of children by Israeli forces in the occupied West Bank.
And one more little thing that is the feature by Reem Salim, which is about Gaza food, undertaking a new diaspora in a way with Gazans. And I have to say, I learned fairly recently about this particular kind of Gaza-style shawarma called farshuha. And I actually had it in Amman, Jordan, at a restaurant. Well, I've had it in two places. I had it in Istanbul at a place run by a Palestinian from Gaza. And there's also another place in Amman, Jordan now. And these are places that are run by Palestinians from Gaza, bringing this particular kind of Gaza cuisine. And Reem talks about these dishes coming to Egypt with Palestinians from Gaza. So it's just another window on the culture, the resilience of Palestinians from Gaza. So if you have a chance to try farshuha, definitely try it. If not, at least read Reem's article about it. It'll make you hungry.
Yes. Thanks for that, Ali. And of course, as always, sign up for our email list up there at the Get Updates button on the left and the Donate Now button on the right, so that you can support this program and the work that we do at the Electronic Intifada, including supporting our contributors in Gaza. And sign up you subscribe at our YouTube channel, all the things, of course. Tamara Nassar is the director and producer of this live stream and all of the standalone podcast episodes that we do. Thank you so much, Tamara. Maureen Claire Murphy, our senior editor, Michael F. Brown, our fact checker, Ali Gerzon for social media production. And on behalf of all of us, myself, Ali, Jon, Asa, and Tamara, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week.